creativity is creating something new that no one's ever seen before. Food, from the sense of just food being your business, it's very difficult to make the financials work. And I wanted to infuse it with this high margin thing that I taught myself how to do, which was like content creation. I only had the goal of wanting to get a paycheck that had Thomas Keller's name on it, with my name on it. Like, I wanted both together. I wanted Thomas Keller to pay me for working at one of his restaurants, and like, I just wanted that as a goal. And yeah, working at the French Laundry, I got that. And so I'll go back to 2022. My business had cracked. It was almost, it had definitely cracked.
So my first question is, you did send me a little like insert about your life and everything, but I would like for you to kind of just give the little recap of your life and just what you've been doing. But I want you to start from the beginning. I want you to start from your first memory of cooking, why you even got into cooking in the first place, like what was it about cooking that was special to you, and just kind of like just recap everything you've been doing and introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so my name is Justin Khanna. I'm based in Seattle, like you said, where we kind of initially connected. We didn't actually end up meeting, but I kind of came here by way of a restaurant that I worked in Norway. And I'll get to why I ended up in Norway, maybe to follow your instructions a little bit and go a little bit further back. There's like, if you really want to think about like the first memories that I have of a cooking related task, there's like an old family camcorder video that my mom took of me where we're like in the kitchen of my parents' house. And for some reason, I'm like making pancakes with Play-Doh. And I thought I can't even remember how old I was in this video. I must have been like 2 or 3 years old. But it's like this video of me just taking these pancakes and flipping these Play-Doh pancakes in a pan. And for whatever reason, like 3-year-old Justin thought it was like the funniest thing in the world. I'm not saying that to say like I'm some prodigy that like ultimately wanted to become a chef in the future, but like if we really think about first memories of like doing things in the kitchen, I like that's what comes to mind first. If we fast forward a little bit, the city that I grew up in like small rural Wisconsin. It was like a town of 1,500 people. There was not a gastronomic scene. It was like buffalo wings and pizza and burgers was like as good as it got. And I, my birthday's in December. And so it's like 2 days before Christmas. And so I basically never got a birthday party. And also I grew up in a house where like my
That's so
mom did,
sad.
yeah, totally. And you know, it's like I as I gotten older, I don't even like having birthday parties now. Um, I don't like, and it's not even like I don't like myself. It's just birthdays never really did it for me. I'd much rather like have more regular times of going out to eat with friends and loved ones and my wife and just that kind of stuff throughout the year rather than like, oh, I have one day where I get to see all my people. Anyways, that's maybe another topic we can circle back on. But my mom would always tell me, because she was not a cook. My mom was like packaged food and like you can eat cereal
Mm.
for breakfast. She never made like eggs or anything like that for us growing up. She might make pancakes on the weekend, but I basically told my mom like I want to have a people over at the house. And she said you can have a half birthday party. And so, you know, December, 6 months after that, it was like sometime in June or July. It was summertime. The weather was nice. And my mom let me have people over and she would buy me cookbooks from, you know, the chefs that were cooking on Food Network at the time. And so this was like the Mario Batalis and the Rachel Rays and the Giada De Laurentises of the world. And I would take recipes from those books and I would make them, and I would make like 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 4 dishes. And I would serve that to like the 6 or 7 family members that would come over. And like, that's when we really talk about like food memories. That was like one of the first ones that I have. But that doesn't even hold a candle to, you know, the food experiences that I got once I finally left Wisconsin, which I'm certainly happy to talk about. But like, I don't have the story of I grew up in a food family. None of my family members were in restaurants. I, again, didn't grow up in an area that particularly prioritized gastronomy. I didn't have chefs that I was just like oohing and eyeing over as, you know, like restaurants that my family liked to even frequent. The places where I really got connected to food was like trips with my dad, because my parents were divorced and my dad wanted to kind of make up for lost time with my sister and I. And so he would take us on trips, whether it was a road trip or a flight somewhere. And we would always, because you're away from home, you're kind of needing to eat out. But then
Yeah.
also I don't know, I don't resonate with a lot of the stories that some chefs have, where they have food so infused in their life and it influences their passion in that way. I much more got connected to food after I left home.
Did you feel like food was a way to connect with people, or since you said that you would go with your dad to eat, that was like some of your memories?
I don't necessarily even know if it's a connection piece. It was more of like an exploration piece, maybe. It was like it got to show me what different areas of the world were all about. And
Mm-hmm.
there's something to like, just because you're sitting at a table and you're in Spain and you're eating gambas, which is like the prawns,
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that you are enjoying it. Like there's an element of being a gourmand, which like uh, Ferdinand Poix, which is like an old school French chef, talked about being a gourmand, like someone who truly loves just the hedonic experience of food and beverage. You can, I mean, that happens all the time, right? Like somebody going to Napa and sitting at a tasting counter and they're drinking a incredible white or red wine, and they might not even be experiencing it in the way that you can if you really pay attention. And so there was a little bit of like a presence maybe point to food that I enjoyed more so than that. And then when we really talk about like becoming a professional chef, there's an element of like the constant improvement and the immediate feedback you get with cooking. Like that actually got me more up and out of bed than the like, I think the stereotype of like food brings people together, because it absolutely does. But I think that there's other elements of it that gravitated me more than the more generalized ones.
Then what is it about food that you gravitated towards then? Is it like because it's an art form? We joke that we have a couple friends who they because we're big foodies too, which is one of the reasons I was drawn to you in the first place. Um, and we have friends who just they don't think about food like that at all. In fact, we have a friend who's like, "Oh, it's weird that you guys ask each other, like me and my boyfriend, we ask each other like what we had to eat that day, like if we
Sure.
didn't see each other, and that's like a point of conversation. And we have a friend who's like, "Oh, that is weird. Like you guys ask each other what you ate," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's like I want to know what we ate." And then so now it's a whole joke where we're like, "Oh, you just see food as like nutrient blocks. Like you're just like I need to consume calories."
Yeah, yeah. The people who drink Huel at their desk as like a meal replacement for 2 meals out of their day.
Yeah,
I can't align with that either. So I think a couple things come to mind. The first is the fact that I think I kind of touched on the immediate feedback that cooking gives. I think that there's something
yeah,
to, I liked driving. I liked like archery. I liked like, I love tennis as a sport for myself, because it's like you hit that ball and it's like it's going to go in a direction. And it's not this thing where, you know, like if I was to get into something like sculpture, where like you sculpt this thing and then you need to have it cure and then it needs to go in the kiln and then like hours later you're going to see the final product. I liked the feedback loops that I got from cooking, of just like I whisked a sauce and it was either broken or it held together, or I flipped that steak over and it either had the right amount of Maillard reaction on it or it did not. And so there was something there. I think there's also this element of people get so into creative pursuits. We can have the is food art or is it a craft debate if you want, but I think it can be so like expressive and organic. And food, in a lot of ways, is not that, because there's a science element to it. You're genuinely conducting a chemistry experiment when you're combining baking soda and flour and salt and egg and sugar in a bowl together. And there's something to that that I also liked, where it wasn't just, you know, like do a bunch of drugs and get on psychedelics and just like paint, you know, because
yeah.
there was something where you had to be focused, you had to be present, and you had to genuinely learn techniques. There was a technique element to it that I think I enjoyed too. I also think that there was a little bit of working with your hands that is kind of aligned with most people that talk about creative pursuits. But then there's a business and a financial side to it. We kind of, I grew up in the age of like celebrity chefs, people, chefs who, you know, had restaurants and then got TV shows, or
Yeah.
had
Hmm.
restaurants, but then moved their way into having like a line at the grocery store or a very successful cookbook, or, you know, like doing a big collaboration with an airline or something like that. And so all of those together, I think, was what drew me to food in a way where, like, I took an art class in high school, and there was so much of that that I didn't. get excited enough about to want to pursue, where food was just like, it allowed me to travel. I got to work with my hands. I wasn't going to be a starving artist. I had the ability to like work in a team with other people. I really liked that. And personal, like it wasn't so team oriented that it was like, I felt like I had an individual contribution. I don't know, like pardon the pun, but it was like a perfect recipe and mixture of things that allowed me to like want to stick with it over time. And I kind of got lucky. Like that was the thing that I decided to do right out of high school. And for whatever reason, I think it was like a lot of experimenting in being a high schooler, because I tried the athlete thing and I tried being a jazz trumpet person and I tried being on the math team and I tried like all of these seemingly disconnected things to say, okay, this has enough of a mixture that I enjoy, and I'm going to commit to this, and I'm going to move to New York, and I'm going to go to school, and then I'm going to work in restaurants, and then that ultimately ended up feeding itself.
So you went to school for culinary.
Yeah, so I went to the Culinary Institute of America out in Hyde Park, New York. It's kind of like the Hogwarts of food. It's like a
Mm,
completely ridiculous campus. And the cool thing about CIA that not a lot of other schools have that have culinary programs is that if you go to CIA, everybody there is food and beverage. So when
yeah.
you go there, you're either focused on culinary, and so you get a chef coat that has like green monogrammed on it with your name, or you go and you focus on pastry and you have brown monogrammed on your chef coat. And it's not this environment where,
And
you
what did
go
you
to a,
focus on?
yeah, yeah. Everybody's focus is on food and beverage. It's not a school environment where you might have people that are focused on business or you might have people that are focused on graphic design. Everybody on that campus is focused on food. And that shows in, when you go to the dining, when we go for your 3 meals a day, you're eating the product of the students that are having that class. And so if I have afternoon classes, when I go into the dining hall for breakfast, I'm eating the stuff that the people that were in breakfast class prepared that day.
Hmm.
And it feeds that whole thing throughout the day. It's really, really interesting. And that is an environment of kind of surrounding yourself with people who are focused on the same thing. That again, we can talk about if you want, but I think that's like big in the creative industries.
So given all of that, would you say that food is an art form, or do you like us think that it's more of just like a craft?
I think what makes it hard for me to say that food is an art form is the fact that we as humans kind of need to consume calories 3 times a day. And I think
Nutrient
that
blocks.
yeah, there's a nutrient block element to it where nobody is saying, okay, Cam, you and I are going to like it's 11 a.m. Do you want to go down to the gallery with me today because I need to get my like painting viewing fix in? Or nobody's saying like, hey, it's 6 p.m. Are you ready to go to the theater, or do you want to put your headphones on with me and we can listen to the music that we need to listen to today to like get our sustenance fill in? And so I think that's part of it where people look at food as like this broad brush thing, when in reality it's like, how many thousands of tens of thousands of millions of people have like Chipotle bowls every day, or McDonald's hamburgers, or Kentucky Fried Chicken every single day? And people
But
look
you
at
wouldn't say
that and you
there's even an art form to like the way that McDonald's has developed this like factory sandwich that they can replicate all over the world.
totally
Like,
I
because I feel like that's artful. It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
even though people are just consuming it to consume it, it's like they've really breaking it down into like a science that could just be repeated over and over and over. And I think that that's kind of like
And if you look at art inspiring conversation, what's more controversial than a Big Mac? Like you bring up a Big Mac in a room and like certain people might like vehemently say, this is factory farmed. These are the worst ingredients you can possibly be putting in your body. And then you have people like you or I who are like, well, there's something from a business sense that's really interesting about this operations that they've managed to nail. And then you also have people like going into different countries and saying like, oh my God, the first, like if you've ever gone to a KFC in Japan, like Japanese people love KFC. Like the
yeah.
lines for
I've read about
KFC
that.
on Christmas in Japan are insane. And so you can look at that and say that like that's maybe art. And so again, like define what art is, and then maybe I think we can get to the root of, is food art or is it a craft? And so and listen, I've worked in 3 Michelin star kitchens. I've worked at the places where like the food doesn't even look like food, and it is like this otherworldly thing where you're twirling things and the knife cuts are so precise and you're like
Yeah.
prepping things in a way where they have unique shapes to ultimately make it be inspired by an impressionist painting or modern art, or it needs to have elements of a sculpture to it. And so I've worked on that side of food too. I think that is much more what people resonate with or think about when we say is food art. But I think that there's enough elements of both craft and art where I think it rides the line with both. And I think, yeah, like maybe that's where I'll leave it.
So in that sense, like you just made me think of something is like um having had the full spectrum of food, basically, like the what I would say, I mean, some people might consider it kind of like the snobby side of it. It's like, and can you still find yourself enjoying just like a Big Mac?
100%. I think, that when we think about you crave the foods that you grew up with, it was like that was comfort food to me. Was like going through the drive-through with my mom and like getting the apple pie at the end of your meal was like that was total. I have a whole. Maybe I'll send it to you and you can put it in the show notes of this. I did a whole piece for I think it was Business Insider when they were asking chefs about like not so hoity-toity food, and I did this whole diatribe on the McGriddle from McDonald's because I think
Mm,
that that sandwich in particular is such a unique culinary creation. And so many people, like I said, thousands of people have that for breakfast on a day-to-day basis. And so there's absolutely zero rejection from me on like certain. Now, it's not to say that I'm not opinionated on things that are more like we'll call it like maybe commoditized food, because there are
yeah.
certain foods that I just think that are like not maybe delicious. But then you also have, because I think about it like this, you have these teams, you kind of touched on this, of like the most talented R&D chefs in the world coming up with the right percentage of food starch and MSG and
To keep
powdered
you addicted.
cheese, yeah, mixed into this cracker that is going to be the new Pringles flavor, maybe, for example. And when they nail it, they really nail it. And it is something that can be like addictive and delicious. But
I
I
think
think,
that is art right there. Like
yes,
just the fact that they're able to do that and just yeah, I mean, I guess there is science to it too. It's just they've like manufactured every aspect of it, but I don't know. I think that is art pretty much.
here's my problem. I think people like, there's too many Venn diagramming things with food where there's too many influences and combinations of things where people want it to be something that it's not, like it doesn't boil down that far. There's this thing, and I kind of use this quote with learning, which is like many variables exist, so many variables must be studied. And I think people think about that with food sometimes, where they're like, I want to draw this one line and connect to these two dots, and I want that to define the correlation that I'm trying to draw here. And it's not robust enough. It's not granular enough, and it falls flat to me. And so that's why I don't. I like having these conversations because I like being able to kind of like flesh out and even kick my own ideas around a little bit in
Yeah.
conversation. But I don't tend to enjoy these debates from the sense of I don't think there's an answer. Like you and I could talk for the next 8 hours, and I don't think we're going to land on a
No, there's no
satisfying
answer. And it's
answer.
all subjective. Like art is
100%.
subjective. Like I could look at it there's some people who look at the couple squigglies on a canvas and they're like down to pay $5,000 for it.
Yep.
Um which is what I think is cool about art is that you could really make it whatever.
And
Um
you're exactly right, and that's what I want people to take from this conversation, is that you don't have to pigeonhole yourself and think that, oh well, I want to be the best chef in the world, or like I want to be the most artistic chef or the most creative chef. I think there's a chef who, as I'm getting older, I think he maybe did more harm than good to the industry. His name's Ferran Adria. He had a restaurant called El Bulli in Spain in the kind of years that I was coming up in the industry. And he had this quote, which is, creativity is creating something new that no one's ever seen before. And I think that is what he prioritized with his tasting menus. And the story goes that he would serve, like 30 course long tasting menus. And the people that had a chance to go there, I never had the pleasure of eating at El Bulli, but the people would go there and they would say, yeah, we had 30 courses and 11 of them were actually like disgusting. Like I genuinely did not enjoy the food that was
yeah.
coming out of that experience. And I asked myself, like, is that what you want with the food that you're serving to people, like, and if we really take a look back, like there's these big long volume book tomes of El Bulli's dishes, and if we were to really look at those dishes and kind of like really analyze them, I think we could draw similarities to other things. Like for example, he had this food starch that he took and he kind of like he folded it on top of itself and he put a filling in the middle of it. And he's like, this is a new thing. This is like something that this deserves to be on my menu because no one has ever seen this before. It's like, dude, that's a ravioli, or like that's a dumpling. Like cultures around the world have figured that out. And it's not to say that creativity cannot be possible. I just think that definition of creativity really hurt a lot of people because it was like, well, I'm not creative because I'm not coming up with something that no one's ever seen before. And I much more resonate with the idea of creativity being like an act of remixing, or like we take the Austin Kleon example of like Steal Like an Artist, where it's like
Yeah.
you take these seemingly desperate things, you not only bring them in, but you're going to infuse them with your life and your point of view and your upbringing, and you're going to present something to the world in kind of like a generous act. That to me aligns much more with creativity than, oh, well, if, because maybe think about it like this. If you take somebody from my hometown who has never been to a fine dining restaurant ever in the world, and you take them to, let's just say, the French Laundry, a restaurant that I had the pleasure of working at for a while,
Yeah.
and you sit them in that seat and you serve them the tasting menu, for all intents and purposes, every single thing that they're going to experience is going to be something that they've never had before, and it's going to completely blow their mind. For someone like myself who has traveled everywhere, I've been to so many restaurants, I've seen every chef's dish on Instagram, I do podcast deep dives on, like shows like The Bear to really analyze what it is this execution is. I've seen that before. And so it's like,
Yeah.
creative to who? You know what I mean? Like creative to humanity as a whole. And I don't, it doesn't give me a satisfying answer to view creativity in that way. And that's a little bit of a tangent. I don't think I've ever gone on this rant before, but, and so I really want to plant that flag because like, I dislike seeing people not pursuing their highest good and their generous, expressionism of what they want to execute, because they fool themselves into saying, well, it's not really creative because of this one what this one Spanish guy or this one Catalan guy said once upon a time.
So I really love this because it is a thought I've had, is that there are no like original ideas. Like if you think of a
Absolutely.
movie plot in your head, it's like, oh,
Oh, that
there's
follows the
definitely,
hero's journey, right?
yeah, like yeah, somebody's thought of that before, for sure.
Yes. Yes.
It's like you said, it's about your own personal execution and also just getting out of your own head. Like somebody's done it before. Somebody's done a podcast. Somebody's done a movie. Somebody's already created a burger. So how are you going to like execute that in a way that is unique to you? So I think it's not about like originality, it's about execution. So I
And
agree with you 100%.
it might not even be about the burger itself. It might be the environment that you're serving the burger in is
That's
something
true
that,
too. I feel
no,
like sometimes there are restaurants that like you'll see on Yelp that are like the food is kind of mid, but like the vibes are cool and like people just want to like go in there and maybe it's themed like I don't know, like there's a restaurant, or not a restaurant but like a bar type thing here in Austin, and it's themed like kind of like D&D, like, and people like going there, and it's not like people aren't going there for the food. They're going there to hang out. The food is just kind of like, oh, there's fish and
totally.
chips or whatever. So I want to break down all the different things that you're doing. So you're doing the YouTube channel, obviously.
Yep. Yep.
You're doing the podcast, which is the was previously known as
The
Emotion
Emulsion
Podcast,
podcast. Yep.
and now it's known as
The
Repertoire.
the repertoire podcast. Yep.
Cool. And at the same time, you're also hosting these like in person kind of like showcasing events, if I understand it correctly.
Yes and no. I think that, the coming, so I'll give some background. So, because I didn't really fill in all the gaps there. So after culinary school, I did the restaurant thing. It was almost 10 years in like fine dining and award-winning kitchens. It went from New York to Chicago to California, all the way to Norway. I ultimately ended up running a kitchen out in Norway. When I finished that position, I wanted to move back to the US. I landed in Seattle and I
Did you
started
get
doing pop-up.
homesick?
Yeah, a little bit. And it was also, yeah, I wanted to be back in the US. And funny enough, your dislike of Seattle was actually like something that I really enjoyed, which is I
The
lived in a
darkness.
yeah, the darkness, the rain, like I like it. And I lived in the rainiest city in Europe. So it was 200 days of rain a year. There was days
Yeah.
where I joke you not, it would rain for 4 days straight. Bergen, Norway, it is so rainy and so dark, and it is also so far north that like in the depths of winter, we would only get like 4 hours of sunlight a
Oh
day.
my god, I couldn't. That was like, but I'm also from Florida though, so it was like
Yeah,
particularly hard for me.
yeah, and so coming to Seattle, it was like, oh well, this is paradise because
Oh,
it's January right now, and we get 8 hours of sunlight a day, and it's really not the worst thing in the world. We get more than 8 hours of sunlight a day, but anyways, so it was time to come back to the U.S. and I landed in Seattle. I started doing pop up dinners, and that was really because I wanted to open a content studio that also served dinners. That was the kind of like philosophy goal that I had set for myself, where it was like food from the sense of just food being your business. It's very difficult to make the financials work from a business sense. There's a lot of labor that's required. Your cost of goods is super, super high. You have to pay for the space that's not always generating revenue all the time. And I wanted to infuse it with this high margin thing that I taught myself how to do, which was like content creation. And so that was going to be my business. And I was basically hosting pop ups to like get my name out there a little bit, but also just like break free from the, I wanted to know what my food actually looked like. Because previous to that, when I would write a menu, it would kind of look like a French Laundry menu, and it was kind of infused with some Scandinavian elements because I worked in Norway. And I wanted to figure out what was Justin's cuisine like. I wanted to have a food philosophy. And so that's why I was doing pop up dinners. I ultimately met a business partner where she had an event production company, and she was like, I need a chef because like I'm doing events more on the corporate side, and I want to be able to host like intimate dinners and product launches and galas and those types of things. And so her and I partnered up and we co-founded this event production company that ultimately grew to having 9 employees, and we had an office in downtown Seattle. And so that's why I was on this like in-person execution side of things. And ultimately part of when you and I connected and I was doing a pop-up dinner at the time, I think this was last
yeah.
year in 2023,
It's
it
like
was because
around May
yeah,
or something.
yeah, it was basically because I wanted to just like keep my skills sharp. I make a lot of content for professional chefs, and I don't ever want to lose street cred. Like I don't ever want to just become just a
Yeah.
content creator where I was like, I'm making all of these advice videos and I'm saying what's in my knife bag, but like I'm never doing cooking things for myself. And
I
part
have
of
the
that's
same
insecure.
those same fears too, by the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, part of that's insecurity, right? Like as I'm going into 2024, I'm starting to realize that like that's just insecurity talking. All of my
Mm.
experiences have kind of like made it so that I don't have to have imposter syndrome of what I'm talking about, and I have enough value to provide to people where I can actually take a little bit of time to just focus on providing value to my audience versus like trying to show people. But I do think that there is a little bit of an element of, if you don't have the experience to be giving advice or you haven't done the thing yet, maybe don't give advice on doing the thing, right? Like I actually don't give advice on how to start your own restaurant because I don't have a restaurant. I give advice on how to go through a culinary program, how to be a great chef de partie, how to be a first time manager, how to write a tasting menu. I give advice on that kind of stuff because I have experience in doing that stuff. And so the in-person execution thing was like just one kind of like chapter or snapshot that you caught me on. What I really spend my time doing and what Repertoire, the company, really is all about is being a modern hospitality education company. And so
Yeah.
our flagship product is called Total Station Nomination, and it's effectively an alternative to culinary school, which I'm more than happy to talk about with you and your audience. But yeah, those are the kind of main things that I do. I have the main Justin Khanna YouTube channel where I do just fun projects like breaking down The Bear on Hulu, or doing fun knife reviews, or like what's in my knife bag. Or I go out to eat at a restaurant and I capture the whole meal and then I do a voiceover on it. So I tell you what I'm eating, what I would have, like what I liked, what I disliked about this whole thing. And then I might do a little bit of a summary at the end. The Repertoire podcast is interviews with other folks, just like what we're doing now, because I don't
Yep.
believe that I'm the kind of like end all be all source of advice and information. And I continue to like learning too. And so I have other, chefs and winemakers and knife makers on to talk about that. And then Repertoire as a company is focused on education. So like high quality, community focused education products, coming up with, really practical templates that people can use on their day to day, B2B, like resources that people can build into their restaurant businesses. So like you want to onboard somebody into your kitchen, have them take total station domination, and then like how is that going to result in higher business economics for you on the other end, because they're going to be higher performing in their role. You're not going to experience so much turnover. They're actually going to say, wow, my employer is really investing into me. There's all these sorts of benefits that I'm hoping to bring to the industry.
So so let's talk about that, and let's talk about the economics of it. As earlier you mentioned that you like being a celebrity chef and kind of having like your own following, and how with just being a chef you will kind of, it seems to me that you'll reach a roof, and then you can't really like move past that unless I guess you open your own restaurant. But then opening your own restaurant to me as an outsider kind of seems really difficult because the margins seem extremely thin. So I feel like it's maybe even easier to become some sort of celebrity or micro influencer or whatever, and then open the restaurant because you already have interest, so you're not starting from zero. But let's start with your first job out of college and kind of like move forward in that, and then how much were you making basically,
Sure.
or just like an estimate as to
Yeah.
how much you were making per year at each one of those jobs.
Yeah, super happy to talk about that. And I just want to, give you a little bit of a handshake and some kudos to talking about money, because I think especially in the creative fields, it's not talked about, and
Yeah.
I'm glad that this show exists in a way that's being trying to be transparent.
So
So,
the way that there's something, just to say it said, but there's something that you said about I didn't want to be the starving artist.
yes.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this show. Like I want to talk to people who are creatives, and I want to explore like even not creatives too, like just business owners and stuff, because I find running a business to be very creative and you have to get super scrappy. So I but I want to talk about money because you watch all, I don't know how lost in the sauce you are with like YouTube
Yeah.
video people, but none of them want to talk about money.
Mhm.
It's like, or even on in like the film side, it's like on sets like everybody's very hush hush about like their day rates and stuff, and I'm like, like we would bring each other up if we talked about this stuff. Like we'd know that you're
Yeah.
getting lowballed. Like
I think it's this funny dynamic where, like you said, you're trying to protect from the downside. You wanting to make sure that nobody is getting the fleece pulled over their eyes and they're not getting hosed by a negotiation where someone is taking advantage of them. That I think is very productive. And then I think there's this other side and dynamic that we experience as creatives, and you've done this probably, Cam. I can only imagine you have, where a client comes to you and they say, we want to do this thing that you offer, and we want to know a price. And they don't have any sort of reference point. They, maybe you're adding scope pieces together in a way that you have never added them together before.
yeah.
And you pitch a price that you've never pitched to somebody else ever. And let's say that's $10,000. You've
Hmm.
previously been charging people $5,000. All of a sudden, now that does two things. Like, it's a major win for you because now you have evidence that someone was willing to pay me $5,000 for this thing, because so much of this pricing stuff is arbitrary, especially in the
Yeah.
freelance game. And
Yes.
two, it is also giving you the confidence to be able to say, like, okay, when I go into my next negotiation, I have the ability to kind of like craft this amalgamation of things to be able to present to this person. Say, yeah, somebody paid me $10,000 to do this before. But the problem is, because it's so nuanced, and especially with like when we're talking about sponsorship stuff, if somebody's going to try to pitch my audience that is incredibly niche and it's working professionals, it's like, shouldn't they have to pay higher than the people who are just down the street who happen to have more of a generalized foodie focused audience, and they're trying to get some subsection of that influencers audience to maybe subscribe to their product or buy their shoes or whatever it happens to be, because I'm helping save them money. And so we're having this negotiation. Or there's another thing, like, maybe I want to do something with this brand that is bigger and badder in the future. And so I'm willing to do it for less now in service of doing a larger contract, or being a speaker at their event, or, previewing their product, or being a part of their commercials later. And so then maybe it doesn't make sense to talk about rates, because it's not a one-to-one equivalency. And so I don't know, like just
Well,
quick to give in
I
context
agree.
of why it's sometimes shrouded in mystery. It's not being malicious.
I
It's
think
just
I think it's a little bit less of that and more that, because yes, it is super like circumstantial. Like
yes,
if
yes,
I'm getting, if a mom and pop pizza shop is coming up to me and they're like, I know that they don't have
yes.
$5,000 to spend on a video, so I know that. But if a big tech company is
Hmm.
approaching me and they're like, oh, like you're gonna be filming the CEO or whatever, it's like, okay, like I know how much you're gonna make off of my video. Um, maybe way, I think even less than you will. Like that's
Sure.
how much money they make. So it is circumstantial, but I mean, at least in jobs and like agency work and that sort of thing,
Yes.
there are like base rates that
Yeah, where
people
it's
don't,
not
or
so yeah, where it's not so negotiated, it's not so high touch, it's more commoditized maybe. It's like there
yeah,
is kind of like a range
a
or a
standard. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So back to coming out of culinary school and the money part. So I graduated culinary school and I was going into it was kind of like a post '08 economy. This was like 2012, so like the economy had just started to kind of like more or less pick up again, and I kind of I wanted to go back to the restaurant that I had interned at in culinary school, and that was a restaurant called Per Se in New York, Thomas Keller's 3 Michelin star place. And so I already had connections there. I knew the kitchen. I had a direct line to like the chef de cuisine, and we were emailing. And I said, "Hey, I'm graduating on this date. I would love to, apply for a position if anything's available." And they told me nothing's going to be available for 4 months. Go get a line cook job somewhere else in New York City, and we'll call you. And that was really
How old
hard.
were you at this point, give or
I
take?
was 19. Yeah, 19 or 20. I was 20,
Okay, so fresh out, like.
fresh out. And that was a really hard decision for me because it was like, well, how am I going to get an apartment in New York when
Mm.
I don't necessarily have a, because that's how it works in New York. You have to be able to show income in order to get an apartment. And so that was really, really difficult for me. I tried staging at other places, which was basically like doing a working interview at restaurants to try to see maybe there is this place that might work. And I can see myself maybe working here for 4 months. And I ultimately staged at a restaurant where this chef named Greg Backstrom, he was like, "Don't go to Per Se." And I was like, "Whoa. Why shouldn't I go to Per Se?" And I took his opinion seriously because he used to work at Per Se. And he said, "You should go to Chicago and you should work for this guy named Curtis Duffy." Curtis Duffy was opening this really ambitious new restaurant, and he said, "You should go interview there and try to get on the opening team of that restaurant." And he said, "If it doesn't work out with Curtis, I'll get you a job at Alinea." And so I was staging at this restaurant called Atera. Greg Backstrom was a sous chef at Atera, and it was basically he presented me this like heads I win, tails you lose. Like maybe that's not the right analogy, but I couldn't lose basically in this thing because either I got on the opening team of this ambitious, crazy, hyped new restaurant, or I got a job at this already 3 Michelin starred fine dining restaurant. It was like a win-win for me all the way around.
Were these all connections that you built through school, basically?
Kind of. It was like I was genuinely interested at working at Atera if I needed to kind of like bridge that gap between school and Per Se. And
So I
so
guess it's like, how were you networking? Were you just like shooting your
cold
shot and
emailing.
like kind of like.
Yeah, cold emailing. So many restaurants have like a careers at, restaurantname.com.
Yeah,
And so I would just send those emails. I have a email template that I actually publish on my YouTube channel for people to get these, higher response rates to cold emails from chefs.
that's
Um,
great.
and so yeah, we can link that in the show notes if people are interested in it because I think it is super super valuable, and I got a lot of value from
Well,
cold emailing.
I love that you did that, because
Yeah.
yeah, like the fact that you just went out and kind of like built these connections is kind of like incredible, because I think most people like go to school and then they're like, oh, yeah, where's my job?
Yes, yes. And it's a network is your net worth kind of thing. And yeah, when you're starting off and you have nothing, it's like, well, you can't necessarily start from zero. And so you need to kind of pull on what you have. And so before like just one, I hate to keep like kicking this can down the road, but I do want to talk about a little bit of a philosophy that absolutely influenced this time in my career, which was like, I'm in a season of learning. The season of earning will come down the track. But right now,
Yes,
I'm
I
willing
relate to
to,
that.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know enough.
I'm
And so I
willing to
need,
suffer for
yeah, I'm
free.
willing to suffer. I'm willing to not make enough money. I'm willing to
Yeah.
eat ramen noodles. I'm willing to like ask for help if I need help to make sure that I can like not like live with roommates, like whatever I need to do to make sure that I can be surrounded by excellence as much as I can so that I can pay down this debt of ignorance that I have as quickly as possible. And so I remember sitting in the interview with the management team at Grace, which is the restaurant in Chicago that was my first job coming out of culinary school. I was 20 years old. Everybody was just kind of asking me, what is Justin going to do after this fancy culinary degree that he got? And I remember the offer letter that they handed to me, which was $8.25 an hour for working in this kitchen as a chef de partie on the opening team of this restaurant that was
Full
like
time or just part
full
time?
time. So it was full time, and it was more than full time because we would get overtime supposedly, and that was kind of the pitch. Is like you'll get $8.25 an hour for 40 hours a week, but then because this is a 3 Michelin star restaurant, overtime will kind of be anywhere from like you might work 60 hours a week, you might work 70 hours a week. None of us were really pushing towards 80 hours that often, but for
So
the most part,
just
go ahead.
really quick, I want to try to keep the timeline. So you were in your hometown.
No, this was in Chicago.
No, no, no,
So
no,
this,
no. Well,
oh,
you started in your hometown. You moved
yep,
to New York to go to
yep,
school.
yep,
Made it through that. Did your parents help you at all, or you were just kind
yes.
of like hustling?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah. So
your
that,
parents were helping you.
yep, 100%. And
Then they're
so
like, "What are you gonna do with this degree?" You moved to
totally.
Chicago
Yep.
through the networks you made, cold calling and all this,
Yep. Exactly.
and then now you got your first job, like ever, or did you ever do any jobs before going to school?
Yeah. So I did jobs going before school, whether it was like odd jobs, like just, working concession stands or like, doing,
Yeah,
chores
little gig
around the
works.
neighborhood kind of
Yeah.
thing. But
Okay.
then also my culinary school required us to have 6 months of industry experience before they would allow us into the culinary program. And so that
Okay.
was, again, a cold calling situation of just like going around my town, trying to find a restaurant that wasn't, again, just a pizza shop or a burger place. And I landed
Yeah.
at a restaurant called Sana, which was like they called themselves a world bistro, which basically gave the chef license to make whatever they wanted and put it on the menu. But yeah, that was a kitchen of the head chef who would do all of the kind of proteins and main courses. I worked on the kind of like cold section. And so I would do like the salads and the appetizers and then the dishwasher. And that was it. There was 3 of us in the kitchen. And so that was my first job ever. Then I went to culinary school in New York. And then I found myself in Chicago at this Michelin rated place.
Were your parents supportive of all this, or were they like, what are you doing?"
My mom was, but my mom was never the one who was like, because my parents were divorced, my mom was more on the like emotional, like you can do, follow your dreams, whatever you
Oh,
want
okay.
kind of support. And then my dad was like, he grew up poor in India and he basically like left, he was an only child and he left
So was
India.
he's down for whatever?
He was down for, well, kind of. He was like you need to find a way to make this practical in the future, but like I understand that education is valuable and I have done the work to make sure that like you and your sister are basically going to have what you need to make it through college, and then it's kind of like you're on your own. And so, like there was definitely support. I'm not going to say that my parents didn't help me, because they absolutely did, and I'm super super hyper grateful for it, because not everybody gets that. But then at the same time, it was like, this is not a like ATM. Like this is not like a never
Yeah, they're
ending
like, you
bank
need to
account.
figure it out at
Totally.
some
You need
point.
you need to you need to take over this at some point in time. And so yeah,
Okay, so
getting that
now you're at Chicago for 825, and that
825. Yep,
and then
yep.
how long do you do that, and then how do you get to the next opportunity from there?
Well, so I'll tell a quick story just because it matters in this context, and this ultimately like inspired doubt in me leaving that kitchen. And so remember, the fact of overtime, for those that haven't worked jobs that give you overtime, is it's time and a half. Once you basically crack over 40 hours, you're getting time and a
Yeah.
half, which is still not a lot. I think like $12 and whatever cents. We don't do public math on podcasts. And so
But you
getting
had
to that,
enough to pay your bills and all this stuff.
basically that's it. And I'm really saying that's it. Like no savings, literally just paying my rent payment, and like maybe even having to ask for help on like, hey, like I need $200 this month kind of thing, because it was like
Yeah.
I can just pay my rent, but like getting food for my fridge, or like what, like any little expense, like paying my phone bill, was like hard. And so that was really hard, just from the sense of, once the restaurant opened and the restaurant got kicked down the road. It was like this case of, okay, well, we're kind of working, but we're not working yet because the restaurant's permitting are falling behind, and like we still can't open yet. But then we finally opened, and I remember you get paid every 2 weeks, and I remember getting that paycheck, and it was something to the effect of like $672 or something like that, which we were working 60, 70 hours a week. It was for 2 weeks of pay. And I was looking at that amount, and it was like, or maybe it was like $872. I can't remember. But basically, the way that the math worked is that I was getting paid for 40 hours a week at $8.25 an hour. And that was what I was basically getting to take home. The punchline is they were not paying us overtime at that restaurant. And that was really, really hard because it was like, not only am I in this tough spot of like, I've committed to this restaurant, I moved to a new city, I don't have any friends, but I'm in this situation where like financially, I don't even have time to have a side hustle. Like I'm working 60 hours a week already. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't have a car. I'm walking to work every single day. And it was not dark from the sense of like I was worried about becoming homeless or anything like that, but it was very debilitating from the sense of there wasn't a lot of financial security.
You realized you
And
needed to make more.
100%. And so that ultimately led me to starting to inspire a little bit of doubt. And then other cooks started to also realize that their paychecks were fucked up. It wasn't just me. And then they ultimately got to this place where like a lot of the staff ended up leaving that restaurant because it was, poorly managed from a financial side.
Is that restaurant still going, or did they not make it?
Kind of. So Curtis Duffy, basically had a falling out with his investor because of a lot of these financial qualms, and him and his business partner closed Grace in kind of a rough and tumble way. It like made a lot of headlines in the way that they closed it, and then they basically opened. I mean, it's effectively a clone of Grace in Chicago called Ever. And now they
Mm.
have a bunch of other businesses associated with that restaurant. They have 2 Michelin stars. Like they have a functioning business again. But it's like Grace in that iteration, in that version, does not exist anymore. And I think because of a lot of these, like the way that the business was structured and the contracts that were written and the people that were involved in that company. And so, yeah, that restaurant is no longer.
I love the aspect that you've been kind of hustling through all this, and that
Mm,
you kind of like have been doing cold emailing and stuff, which is not something that I've heard a lot from. I guess like I feel like I do that a lot, but that's also like I don't know. I guess in the context of it being like for chef, like I've never seen
I mean,
people do that.
it's so underrated. Like if you can get used to rejection or be okay with the fact that you're going to send 10 emails and only one person's going to get back to you, and
Yep.
that person that's going to get back to you is going to tell you no, and then you're going to have to send 10 more to try to get a yes or maybe even a maybe. That is kind of a superpower, especially in the early days when you already have imposter syndrome because you're like, I don't feel like I can provide any value to this organization, but I'm literally trying to apply for a job to work there because all I want to do is learn. I think there's
Yeah.
something to just overcoming that and being able to stick with it and do it, which kind of leads me into when I was ready to leave Chicago. I was not cold emailing anymore. It was more of a warm lead, but it was a connection that I had through my internship in New York. And so the guy who was the second in command kind of at Per Se was leaving Per Se to go across the country to Thomas Keller's sister restaurant called the French Laundry in California to be the chef de cuisine. And so he was getting a promotion and getting moved from one location to another. And I had kind of heard the news that this was happening, and I still had his contact information. And so I sent him an email, and it was something to the effect of like, this Chicago thing isn't really working out. I saw that you're, going to, you know, the French Laundry. Is there any world that I could, come interview for a job? Like, would you consider me for a position? And he said, yeah, come stage. I, again, didn't have all that much. I'm almost positive I needed to ask to borrow money for the flight to go out to California to stage for this position. I went and did the stage. I hadn't yet quit my job at Grace because I was like, I
Just
want
in
at least
case.
a little bit of certainty. Yeah, like I can continue to maybe suffer, but there was all these other things that needed to be unwound, right? Because I hadn't. It was all I was maybe 2 or 3 months short of a full year in my apartment in Chicago, and so I would have had to break my lease in Chicago. And I can't even remember if it was a full year lease, or if I signed a 15-month lease or something silly like that. But I needed to unwind things, and so I didn't
Yeah.
want to unwind things without the next thing fully realized. And so, long story short, I get the job at French Laundry. It is confirmed. And yeah, I had
Okay,
to,
that's kind of a huge leap to like.
huge.
So you go from just this kind of I, I guess for lack of a better word, like a little bit of a dead end job to the French
Totally.
Laundry.
So it's not maybe really fair to call Grace a dead end job, and I'll a couple of reasons. One, because the chef had like a pretty substantial pedigree, and there was like a lot of techniques that were done at this restaurant that like I got to see. They weren't like the most robust techniques from like the cooking side of things. It was really following a lot of like the molecular gastronomy stuff that was popular at the time, more so than I think the cooking that I more gravitated towards or wanted to learn. Secondly, Grace kind of like came out of the gate and they got 2 Michelin stars. And then they ultimately went on to get 3 Michelin stars, which is the only other restaurant in Chicago other than Alinea to have 3 Michelin stars. And so it's not to say that Grace was not a good restaurant. I think there was
Yeah.
just a lot of, again, underpinnings of poor contract writing and poor business ownership from the sense of the chef owner not really having all that good of chops of being an entrepreneur that like again it really stuck with me and it really pushed me to become more entrepreneurial later in my career. But yeah, there was definitely things that I did not like about Grace that ultimately pushed me to go to something that was a proper restaurant group, which was like Thomas Keller Restaurant Group. There was much more operational infrastructure. There was like at Grace, the HR person was also the lady who took reservations, which was kind of funny. Whereas at Thomas Keller Restaurant Group, like you have proper onboarding, like you really got a welcome packet. There was a these are our core values. Like there was a full HR department that had your back if you wanted to like have a company sponsored 401k. Like there was all these benefits that came with going to a larger organization that I certainly enjoyed, but that didn't necessarily come with that much of an increase in pay. I thought for me, it was awesome because I knew I was going to be guaranteed the overtime at my new rate, which I think was $9.25 an hour. So it was going from 8.25 or 8.50 to I think 9.50 or 9 something. It was still less than $10 an hour, but it was so much more for me in my mind because I knew there was a little bit of like stability and a guarantee on my paycheck every single month.
That was at the French Laundry.
That was at the French Laundry.
Before you left to the restaurant in Chicago, did you try to maybe like negotiate with them? Like, hey, I've got this new offer.
I
Did
could I could have, but I think that because there was like a mass staff exodus that was happening, and because everybody had such a bad taste in their mouth from this, not getting our overtime pay, it was a little bit of a not a losing battle, but I think there was so much turbulence and uncertainty in the restaurant at the time, not just from the staff morale, but like, is this restaurant going to be successful? Kind of, like it was difficult. If said another way, if the restaurant had just come out claiming record profits, then I think that there was a world where I would have the confidence to sit down and try to do a negotiation. But there was like, are we even going to be able to like stay open and be open next month? And so believe it or not, when I sat down, so when I say mass staff exodus, there was a lot of people who just like no called, no showed. Like they did it as a, like expression of dis, distaste. And they were just saying, like, F you, middle finger, I'm not going to show up for work. Certain people walked out during service and just didn't, you know, it was really negative. I thought, being the youngest member of that opening team, I was going to try to be professional and give my 2 week notice and say, you know, I'm sorry. I wrote a letter. I printed it out. I signed it. I like brought it in. I said, hey, chef de cuisine and chef owner, I would like to sit you down in the private dining room and have a conversation. I'm giving my 2 week notice. And because I hadn't worked there for a year yet, which again is this arbitrary time frame in restaurants and chef culture, where like if you're going to work somewhere, and this comes from a chef that the owner of that restaurant used to work for, named Charlie Trotter, where he had this whole thing of, if you don't work for me for a year, you shouldn't say that you ever worked for me. And that was like his whole MO. And so I was just short of a year working
I
for
feel like a
Chef
lot of
Curtis.
businesses do that. They do
Totally,
the
totally. He's not the only one. And so I was just shy of a year, and I gave my 2 week notice, and they said, you should be ashamed that you're leaving. That was literally what they told me. There was like, don't ever say that you worked here. That was
Are you
very much so the
serious?
sentiment. Yeah, that was very much so the sentiment that they told me. And so that was hard because it was like I put a lot of trust in this move. I again moved across the country. I didn't know anybody. I was young. I couldn't even go out to drink yet. Like I was still
Hmm.
20, like I turned 21 years old at that restaurant. And so yeah, that was really really hard. And then the 2 weeks that were my last 2 weeks were really rough. It was like they would, always question my commitment. And once it got out, because I had told one person that was like a close confidant friend of mine, I was like, yeah, I'm leaving here, but I actually did get a job offer at the French Laundry, so I'm going there next. And lo and behold, that gossip made its way around. And on one of the days when I was like breaking down and I was cleaning my station up, I had like plastic wrapped something and it just wasn't quite right. And my sous chef basically came up to me and be like, is that going to fly at the French Laundry? And I was like, oh shit, like I'm getting shit talked at my current job for this job that I'm going to go. So there was a lot of like doubt and fear and uncertainty, just like making that transition. But yeah, it was not easy, but it was like a necessary change that I needed to make in order to make sure that I could stay involved in the industry. So yeah, then I go to Napa, and then I'm working at the French Laundry.
Yeah, that's was so I know what the French Laundry is just generally from videos and stuff and kind of being a foodie and stuff myself, but at the time, was the French Laundry, did it have its reputation yet, or this was a startup still?
No, 100%. The French Laundry has been around, I think, from the mid 90s, believe it or not. And so it's been around for ages. I think the 20-year anniversary, something like that, happened when I was there. So it was 1994 to 2004 was 10 years, and then 2004 to 2014 was 20 years. It was something around that time frame.
So
And
you were aware of how prestigious this was.
100%. And it was one of those places where I was like, well, believe it or not, because I wanted to have a 3 Michelin star restaurant in Chicago, I was trying to play the lineage game. And so I grew up respecting Grant Achatz a lot, who's the chef of Alinea, and he learned under Thomas Keller at the French Laundry. And then Curtis Duffy learned under Grant Achatz at Alinea. And so I had it in my head that I was going to go learn under Curtis Duffy, and then I was going to be the next, guy that was going to do a fine dining concept. And that was going to be the whole thing. And so it didn't even cross my mind to go straight to the source, to French Laundry, for a couple of reasons. One, because like they were still doing the things that they had become well known for. They had the 3 Michelin stars for. And it was also the fact that Thomas Keller does not work at any of his restaurants anymore in the same capacity that he did when Grant Achatz was coming up. When Thomas Keller was on the pass every night, he was the one leading the menu meetings. He was the one who was like saucing the plates and tasting the, components and all that sorts of stuff. And so I didn't want like a watered down version of the French Laundry experience. But what I didn't realize is that David Breeden was the guy from Per Se who was going to French Laundry to be the chef de cuisine. And for those that don't know David Breeden, I mean, I'll summarize it with what I heard. I can't remember if it was a front of house person, like a back server, or a pastry chef, but they basically said that Thomas Keller has actively said in the past, and I'm really not trying to make this a quote, like I'm not trying to quote Thomas Keller here, but the common sentiment that you will hear multiple people that have worked at the French Laundry say is that Thomas Keller knew when he put David Breeden in charge of the French Laundry that he was putting someone in that position who was a better cook than he was. Because David Breeden's palate and his finesse and his ability to weave flavors together and create dishes, and don't even talk about like his meat program. Like the guy's ability to butcher and work with proteins is unmatched in any capacity that I've ever seen in my career. Like he's just so skilled and talented. And I like that is what ultimately justified the move for me, was like wanting to go work for David Breeden made more sense than saying I want to go to work at the French Laundry because I want to work under Thomas Keller. And I think that's crazy that like David Breeden isn't a bigger, and part of it is like he has made a big transformation in himself personally over the years. He like works out like crazy now, and he's like doing, squats and deadlifts and short shorts in California and like doing 5K runs. And he was, for a lot of, for all intents and purposes, like he was an unhealthy, very toxic chef when I worked for him. And so again, people can change, which is maybe another topic we can get on either now or in a different episode. But yeah, going to work for David Breeden was absolutely like a good decision at that time.
How long were you at the French Laundry for?
Just under 2 years. So it was much more of a commitment than I was at Grace.
Okay, and then did you get any pay bumps during that time, or you just had stayed at 10 an hour that entire time?
Maybe I did get a little bit of a pay bump because most people start at the French Laundry as a commis, so you're basically like a prep cook. and that was at that, I think that $9.50 an hour rate. And then I think when I became a chef de partie, when I was running a station, I think that bumped maybe to like max 10. I was never getting paid more than $11 an hour. And so like don't know the numbers exactly, and part of that was
Yeah.
helpful because or maybe it didn't
You were
matter
not
as
thinking
much
about
because we were
money.
getting overtime, right? So it was like you would always guaranteed hit your peak of 40 hours, and then
Yeah.
it was like how much overtime did I end up working was always kind of dictate what your paycheck looked like.
Yeah. So in Napa you were not struggling, like you had
No,
money left over at this point.
yeah, more or less. I mean, I wasn't doing any sort of like investing. I wasn't like balling out or in any
Mm-hmm.
regard, but I had a roommate and I had an apartment in Napa, and I remember I bought like Hertz, the car rental company, had
Yeah.
this thing where you could actually buy like old rental cars. So that's how I ended up like buying the car that I would use to commute to work, because it was, for those that don't know, Napa kind of runs in a straight line because it's a valley. And so there's,
Mm-hmm.
there's like two highways that run through Napa, more or less, the Napa Valley, basically. And so French Laundry is in Yountville, and Napa is kind of like, it's more of a city. It's more of a, like there's more stuff in Napa. And so me and my roommate lived in Napa, and then I would commute to Yountville every day. It was like a 15 or 20-minute drive every day.
Yeah, that's not too bad. Um, so then from being at the French Laundry, and I guess it just like, what was it like working at the French Laundry? Like, I know that you probably get asked that question a bajillion times, but just if you were to recap, like, was it a good learning experience? Was it something you wish you could have done for longer? Did you? I feel like that. I mean, in my perception, the French Laundry is one of the top restaurants. It's like I'm
100%.
sure there's other ones, but at least for like a normie, like a food normie, the French Laundry is like over here. So what was that just generally like?
I have two perspectives to share on this. One is the like hindsight version of this, which I think I look back at, as with most of us look back in our lives, with it's 2020 vision looking in hindsight. And then there's the like lived experience of what Justin, what my self talk was at the time.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'll start with the self talk version, which was I was incredibly excited just for the opportunity, like to be at a kitchen when that Thomas Keller's name and reputation was still like, for all intents and purposes, at an all time high, and it was still incredibly competitive to go work at one of his three Michelin star places. And for me, it was a lot of like full circle moment of being able to say, well, I didn't get the job at Per Se, but I interned at Per Se, and now I'm at the French Laundry. So I've spent time at both locations, and I've accomplished this goal of, I remember when I was an intern at Per Se, this is an interesting point for this conversation. One of the big goals I had, because I was working for free at Per Se, I wasn't getting paid as an intern. I only had the goal of wanting to get a paycheck that had Thomas Keller's name on it with my name on it. Like I wanted both together. I wanted Thomas Keller to pay me for working at one of his restaurants, and like I just wanted that as a goal. And
Yeah.
working at the French Laundry, I got that. Seems kind of silly, but like when you're working for free, that was what it was. I think the benefit that I had of the timing of going into French Laundry was that when David Breeden had come in, I started my job there, I think 6 or 8 months after he had come over and taken over as chef de cuisine. And what was happening in that time was a lot of like the chess pieces were moving. So a lot of the like old people who worked for the old chef de cuisine were like, who's this new guy? He's coming in and he's being kind of a hard ass. He has a lot of systems that he's putting into place. He's changing the menu. He has a different food philosophy. He's using different ingredients in different ways that we're not quite used to. And a lot of people were leaving. And that actually was really beneficial to me because I was part of the new guard. I was part of the new people who were coming in. And David Breeden did a really good job, I would say, of like getting people invested in the like commitment to the place, being like, all I do is eat, sleep, and breathe the French Laundry, because that's who he was. He like had one singular focus in his life, which was being the chef de cuisine of the French Laundry, and he finally had it. Like he had it in his hands, and he wasn't going to just let it go or like succumb to lower standards of other people. And what was the problem with that is once I had gotten the Comey part done and I got onto my station, it was kind of like the train was already moving and all the cars on the train were in the positions that they needed to be in. And all the people who were not going to stick around had left. And all the people who were still on board was like, they weren't going to leave because David Breeden had kind of like infused in everybody's mind, you are committed to this and you're going to stay here for however long. He talked in like 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 year time horizons with somebody, not just the next month or the next 3 months. And that made it really hard for me because I was stuck on a very low level station and no one was moving. Nobody was leaving. Nobody was getting promoted. Everybody was staying where they were at. And I felt like I got the wrong car in the train, basically. And I was like, well, shoot, I really want to go work Canapé Station because next to Canapé Station is Fish Station. And I really want to work Fish Station. And that was a natural progression that other people had made. The problem was somebody needed to move in order to open up that slot. It wasn't like they just say, oh, Justin, you're really good at this station, so we're going to move you over to you're going to get a Canapé Station position. There was only one Canapé Station. It was like there weren't multiple. And so that started to cause a lot of angst in me, which started to negatively spiral myself all the way down. Because I was like,
just felt like people were not going to leave their positions.
Yeah. So it was like, well, what's the point in me trying to like improve myself? Because even if I do perform at the highest level, it's like, it's not in service of a potential promotion for me because there's no position available. And so that was really frustrating because then my work would start to suffer and I wouldn't have consistent stuff, or I wouldn't have enough mise en place heading into service and I would run out of stuff. And then that would actually negatively impact my reputation. And then that made me feel like I was even going to be considered less for a promotion and somebody was going to leapfrog me. And then that would like make my effort go up a little bit just to meet that waterline of making sure that I was doing the bare minimum. And that was really, really negative. Combine that with I had some like negative stuff going on in my family at the time. And I was like, well, do I really want to be like continuing to work 78 hours a week when like my family might need me on these sorts of things? And so that was really hard. And so, yeah, it was that's how it felt in the moment of like just feeling like I wasn't able to move up to get promoted. And so I ultimately worked that station, that low level station, for like a little over a year. And so I was like a commis for I think like 4 or 5, 6 months. And then I was on that station for the rest of my time at the French Laundry. And so that was really, really hard when it was like, well, yes, I worked there, but I didn't cook things. I cooked things from the sense of like my mise en place, but I never worked the hotline at the French Laundry. And so that ultimately also made me feel like a little bit of imposter syndrome and like, well, I'm saying that I worked at this great restaurant, but like, I don't know how to cook a piece of fish. Like, I don't know how to cook the scallops here. I don't know how to cook the A5 Wagyu that we're serving on the tasting menu. I just know how to plate.
What did a regular day kind of look like? You were just plating
so you get in at 11. If you're working dinner service, you get in at 11. Everybody says that the start time is at noon, but everybody shows up an hour early. You still clock in, but it was like kind of understood that you show up an hour early. And then you prep from then until 4. And so you kind of get like 5 hours of prep. The menu changed every single day. And so I'll get to that at the kind of what the end of the day looks like. And so you're prepping all new stuff. You're not using stuff from the day before typically. And so you prep until around 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock, you have staff meal. And so that's when you kind of take a break. You're usually making one component of staff meal. And so my station would typically make the salad every day for staff meal. And you're cooking for, between like 40 and 60 people for staff meal because you have front of house included as well. And so you're, making salad for 40 people in addition to all of your prep. Staff meal happens, and then you're getting set up for service at 5 because service starts at 5. And then there's typically like 2 pushes during that time. So you have a bunch of people who have reservations somewhere between 5 and 6. They're sitting down. And then you ultimately like do their long tasting menu. You have a little bit of a lull between like 7 and 8. And then at 8 o'clock, you have another round of people coming in and they're going to kind of like sit at those tables. And sometimes it's a turn, sometimes it's not. But yeah, then after service, like that 3-hour long tasting menu starts again at 8 o'clock, somewhere between 8 and 9. And then you're doing that up until like 11-ish. And then you start cleaning at 11. So you're already 12 hours into your shift and you need to break down your station. You need to clean everything. You need to make sure that all of your mise en place that you either used today or didn't use today, you usually like either contribute it to another station or you're going to say, hey, I have XYZ things. Can we use this for tomorrow in some way, shape or form? And then at, a little after midnight, like 12:30, you're going to sit down with all the other chefs and then you're going to write the menu for the next day. And so you're going to say, what does the garden across the street have? What do we have in the fridges? What is interesting that we are excited about that we want to be using, and then you write the menu from scratch. That is the chef's tasting menu. The vegetable menu more or less stays the same from like on a 6 week, 8 week, 3 month basis. But yeah, the menu does absolutely change every single day, and then that dictates like what do I need to order from the AM prep team, what orders do I need to put in for produce for the next day, and then those orders get submitted, and then you go home at I don't know 1 or 1:30, and then you go home and you sleep, and then you wake up at
Do
10
it
a.m. the
again,
next
all
morning.
again.
Yeah, and then you do it all again, and so that's 5 days a week.
Yeah, it sounds to me like this is like not conducive of like work life balance at all.
Not at all. Not at all. It was
So
exhausting.
yeah, so I'm guessing. I mean, would you? Well, there's two things.
Well, let me just wrap that up just really quickly in talking about like hindsight, Justin,
Oh, okay,
because
go for it.
what
Yeah.
I have the ability to see now in the like not being steeped in it so much is yes, I was frustrated that I was working this low level station. But ultimately what I was getting in being in that environment was I learned all of the other things that I needed to know in order to make sure that when I did have the opportunity to work a hotline station at a fine dining
Yeah.
restaurant, I wouldn't have to learn all the nitty-gritty details. The how to label your mise en place, how to set up your station, how to move with a sense of urgency, how to like when you go to the dish area to grab stuff for not just this task, but the next task that you're going to have to do. And all of those sorts of like working with a fresh sheet, what happens when you run out of
Being
stuff, how,
efficient.
how to be efficient, how to plate
Yeah.
stuff with finesse. Like there's this little stupid thing that I used to have to do every day, which was like a quenelle of butter. So it's like you take a hot spoon and you dip it in hot water, and you have tempered butter, and you do this scoop that looks like an egg. And I had to do 40 of those a day, and it was like so stupid that I had to do quenelles every day, but I got super fucking good at doing quenelles. Same thing with like squeeze bottle swooshes on plates. It was like I had to do so many of those in that time that like all these little seemingly unconnected, unimportant details were really internalized for me. Secondly, I got to see what good systems at a restaurant look like. And so you get the recipe for black olive puree. There is one recipe for black olive puree that is used at Thomas Keller Kitchens. And you have to go to the chef's office, and it's in a book, and you get it and you write it down in your recipe book, and you only use that recipe. Compare that with like other restaurants I've worked at where it's like, yeah, chef kind of has the recipe, but like you got to go ask him because like there's no system to it. And it's like, well, why don't you just try putting paprika in this and just see if it works or not? And I loved the fact that French Laundry had systems and structure because it was such the antithesis of the restaurant that I worked at prior. And again, it taught me all the little internalized details that made me like a high functioning professional, so that when I go to my next job, I ultimately was able to thrive and get promoted so quickly.
Yeah. It seems to me like though from what you were saying that you kind of felt like you needed to see the next step. Like you felt like I feel like there's two kinds of people. There's kind of people who are just more okay with just doing the same thing, and they kind of like are like, okay, cool, like I'm doing this now. But then there's people who are like, okay, like how do I get to the next station? How do I? Okay, like yeah, I have this job, but like how do I get the next thing? It's like, so it seems to me like that's something that you're feeling this whole time.
Well, yeah, because to me, the goal was having that restaurant still. I still wanted to be chef owner of a fine dining restaurant. And it felt a little bit like wasting time is maybe the wrong word, because like I still wanted to get the experience. But I think there was other people who were working at the French Laundry. Like I had a sous chef at the French Laundry when I worked there, and he had worked when he left, he had worked for the French Laundry for over 10 years. And I
Wow.
never saw myself being in that type of a role. Like I didn't want to be just a team member at the French Laundry for a long period of time. And it wasn't to say that I wanted to just like extract as much as I could from this experience and then kick it to the curb, but I also like I didn't want to become a career employee, because that's kind of the rub with corporate environments or more structured restaurant groups, is that they give you the opportunity to genuinely have a career there. Like you can stay there for a long period of time. And the great organizations that take care of their employees, they make that possible for people.
So
I just knew that
what
that
did you feel like was wrong with being a career? I mean, maybe wrong is
Yeah,
not the good word, but like, what
right.
did you feel like you didn't want about being a career employee?
I think I kept it in my head that if you only get experience at one place, and I was kind of writing Grace off in my mind as like the only experience that I have is at the French Laundry. I knew that if that was the only point of view that I brought into my project, if I went straight from French Laundry to going somewhere else, it would be this frustrating point of view of like, I just look like a carbon copy of the French Laundry. And I saw that with
Mm.
Grace because Curtis's major restaurant experience was both at Charlie Trotter's and Alinea. And for all intents and purposes, Alinea was just like, like more molecular Charlie Trotters. And I didn't like the fact that Grace kind of felt like second best Alinea. And I didn't want
Mm.
that for myself. And so I knew that there was going to be something else that I needed to do after French Laundry to round out my experience, to make sure that I wasn't just a carbon copy, and that I needed to get experience somewhere else. I wasn't making any moves in my current position. And so I felt really stagnant. And I was like, I wasn't learning anymore. The learning curve had plateaued for me. And so that was really frustrating. And so I was like, it was one of those like shit or get off the pot kind of situations where it was like, why am I still here if I'm not learning and I'm not getting paid more? And the track to something like management is like so far off for me. And then I also mentally had a couple of other like arbitrary timelines in my head. Like I was 21, I think, when I got hired at the French Laundry. And I was like, well, I want to have my Michelin star kitchen by the time I'm 24 or something like that. I had some stupid number in my mind, stupid
Oh,
age
that's
in my
that's
mind.
really ambitious. I thought you were gonna say by 30, and I was
No,
gonna be like,
no.
well, I mean, it's
Well, because
I
there's a
guess it's
story of
theoretically
like,
doable.
right. I mean, like there's a story of like
You're
Marco Pierre White,
24.
who's the chef in the UK who, like he had Michelin stars by the stupid young age. Like he had 3 Michelin stars by 27
I
or
feel like that's
25.
so toxic though to compare your
Super. Yeah,
own.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, well, I'm falling behind or I'm not doing enough. Like just classic early
Yeah, yeah.
20s, conversation of just like, well,
Hmm.
I'm not moving along fast enough if I don't have this. And so a lot of that was like infusing into my feelings of like I need to move on.
Then what's next? How'd you
Yeah.
get to?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you
So
directly go to Norway, or is there some sort of stepping stone in between?
there kind of is. I mean, it's maybe a little bit less important for this conversation. I can just spend 90 seconds on it really quickly. I worked at a butcher shop in Napa called the Fatted Calf, and it's an incredibly high quality butcher shop. They do a really good job. What I really liked about that position is it was in the front of the butcher shop. So I was not the one in the back butchering and making sausages and wrapping things. I was in the front talking to customers that would come in. And so I would slice mortadella and prosciutto for people, and the people would come in and they would ask, like, how do I make this steak for dinner tonight? I have this great
That
wine
sounds
that I
kind of
want to.
chill, actually.
It was, and it was a 40-hour work week. That was the big thing. It was 40 hours. It was 8 hours a day. I got a real lunch break. And so comparing that with the 3 Michelin star environments that I was coming from, it was like a half day. It genuinely felt like a half day. And so I could go hang out with friends. I could host dinner parties at our apartment. I could go visit wineries if I wanted to. I could,
That's
go
awesome.
for a
Sounds
run.
great.
Like, yeah, it was awesome.
Did you
And so,
take a pay cut to work at the butcher shop, or
I mean, yes and no. I think I was getting paid like 11 or $12 an hour for that. And
they just
so
took
like,
a pay cut in the terms that you didn't get the overtime?
yeah, that's right. And so no overtime, which, was what it was. But again, I felt like I could
Sometimes I
have
feel like
a half
time is
day.
more valuable.
Yeah, and quality of life. Like I wasn't getting
Yeah.
berated all the time. I wasn't anxious driving into work every day. I genuinely liked my coworkers, and so that was a benefit from the sense of just giving me a break. But the kind of funny part about it is I only did that butcher shop thing for like 3 or 4 months. Like I didn't
And
need
then
that
you were
long of a
just like,
break.
I need the stress again.
I need the stress again. I need to be back in it. And so remember I said I was living with a roommate. That
Yeah.
roommate was going to wine school, and he had graduated wine school. He was looking for his first job out of wine school. And again, talking about personal connections, there was this guy who was half Norwegian, half American that also worked at Per Se. My roommate, the reason I had him as a roommate is because he was also an intern at Per Se when we were both in New York, and we
Yeah.
ended up living together in California. And so him looking for his first job out of wine school, he contacted this half Norwegian, half American guy who was opening a restaurant in Bergen. He was kind of going back to his hometown and he was trying to make a name for himself. And I think he put out a post on Facebook saying, I'm looking for a wine director. And my roommate, John, shoot a shot in the dark. He was like, I don't ever have experience running a wine program, but like I'm gonna shoot my shot and I'm gonna ask
Yeah.
this guy if I can take this wine degree that I can have and if I can move to Norway. And he's like, he's like, I got the position. And I was like, see you, dude. Maybe I'll come visit you in Norway someday, because I didn't even have it in the back of my mind. But when I was actually working at the butcher shop in those 3 months, I started to like really start to build up maybe a little bit of savings. I had some savings from the French Laundry, but then I was
Hmm.
like, I can take this savings that I have and I can blow it all basically traveling Europe for a month, because I really wanted to go experience Europe, like in the current iteration of chef that I was, to kind of get inspired and get out of the US, get out of the California bubble.
Just like a
Or
quick
yeah,
side
go
note
ahead. Go
with
ahead.
because you're talking about like how crazy the hours and all this stuff were is how are you making time for relationships like friendships and love relationships and all this stuff, or is everything just like down the drain, you're just work only?
Yeah, I think from a romantic relationship perspective, I was still dating my girlfriend from like when I started culinary school. Her and I connected in Wisconsin. She's my wife now. We just had
Oh,
our
you
firstborn
guys.
son together, and so we
Oh,
stuck together
wow.
through the whole time. And what we really liked about being long distance, we were long distance for a little over 5 years, believe it or not, is that we were both so focused on our thing. My wife was in pharmacy school. She got her MBA at the same time. She
But
was
you
doing her
met her in
residency.
culinary school.
No, I met her at a high school graduation party in Wisconsin. And so this was like,
Okay.
we went to different high schools. We grew up in kind of like the same hometown, but like we didn't know each other up until right before we left for college. And so she was super busy. I was super busy. And so what was nice is we both like had our person and we had the relationship box checked, and we would always go home to the same place, which was Wisconsin, when we had
Yeah.
time off or traveling home for the holidays. And so we would get to see each other on a regular basis. She would fly to California, or I would go to Iowa where she was going to school if I had like a vacation slot that I was able to take, or we would travel to have a holiday together somewhere. So that was taken care of more or less. And then the like friendship side of things, I was mostly friends with my coworkers. Like I was
Mm.
mostly just homies with like, hey, I'm on Cheese Station, you're on Cheese Station, like let's just be friends. Or like I'm on Cheese Station, you're a commis, let's be friends. Or that's what was a really big benefit of me having a roommate that I knew before he became my roommate. Like we were friends before we moved in together. And we both were working in the industry. And so that was also really helpful to have a friend in that regard. But I was not, absolutely not like going to, yoga classes and meeting new people, or like going on
Yeah,
hikes,
there
or
was no time for like extra
none
stuff.
of that. None of
And
that.
then so okay, so you have this relationship, and then how do we get to Norway from this point?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have this question of I can take all my savings and blow it to travel Europe, or I can email this Norwegian guy and say, I will come work for you for 6 months in an effort to be able to like get paid from you. I will have an apartment, or I will live with my roommate, or like my old California roommate, but I will literally sleep on his couch in Norway because I knew he had an apartment because we were
Yeah.
just messaging each other. So I'll like live quote unquote rent free. I'll pay to stay on this guy's couch, but basically like I'm not going to commit to being in Europe forever. I'm only going to commit for 6 months. I'm going to try to maximize the amount of money that I can save, quote unquote, from working for this Norwegian guy. And I'm going to be able to go to Paris. I'm going to go to London. I'm going to go to Copenhagen. I'm going to go to Amsterdam. I'm going to spend all the time that I can in these 6 months being in Europe. And it's just going to be awesome. And so that was my plan. The guy actually said yes, because he was looking for cooks, and he was like, I would really much rather you be able to commit for a year, but like if you can only commit for 6 months, I totally get it. Come out and I'll give you a job, basically. And
When
so
did you start making content, by the way? Like, did you make content?
in Norway.
Yeah, I think because I looked at your channel and stuff, and so I thought like that's when you started, give or take. It's like when you got to Norway.
Exactly, exactly. And part of it was talking about money and perks that are not financial. The Norwegian kind of like culture is that everybody gets 6 weeks of PTO. And so I was going from one, maybe two
You wanted the
weeks
work
of
life
vacation
balance.
to six all of a sudden. And it was like, combine that with the fact that I was still working French Laundry hours just at this no name restaurant on the west coast of Norway. I think it's like a financial hack where you're working so much that you don't actually even have time to spend the money that you're making, where like the savings just kind of happens. Because I used to do this funny thing on my phone and my Norwegian bank account, and I used to take a lot of pride in because credit cards are just like not really a thing. At least they weren't a thing in Norway and most Scandinavian countries when I was there. Most people are like debit card only, which is
Yeah.
anti how the US works. And so what was cool was I could always see in my Norwegian bank account like when I spent money from debited from my account. And I used to do this fun game where I would look on my weekends of how many days did I go without spending any money, because that was
Mm-hmm.
genuinely like how much time I was spending at the restaurant. And every single time I'd get a paycheck, it would just kind of sit there because I would wake up and I would go straight to work and I would like eat like a piece of sourdough bread from the night before, or like go on pastry station and like grab some things and just kind of like make something for myself and just have coffee maybe. And then I would like snack on my mise en place throughout the day. I would have staff meal at the restaurant at 4:30, and then at the end of the night I would like have something cheap that I would just like, pizza or something like on my way home or something like that. And I
Yeah.
wasn't really spending a lot of money. And I was getting, when I would go on vacation, I was still getting paid from my employer basically. And so I could go on vacation and like not ball out, but like I had and also
You felt
because you're in,
comfortable.
yeah, more comfortable. You're in Norway. A flight to Copenhagen is like $90. You know what I mean? And so like you have the ability to go and also you have friends that are now Scandinavian. We had people from 14 different countries working at the restaurant in Norway. And so when I would go and travel to like Sweden, I would go to Stockholm and I would stay on somebody's couch, which was really low cost travel for me to go around. And that's what ultimately got me into content creation, because when you're traveling, everything is new. And so you feel like you can capture it versus if you're just like staying at home and you have this camera and you're like, it's hard to look at things with a novel lens. I know you probably have a different view of this because that's
I
your
just feel
eye.
like I'm not that interesting. I'm
Right,
like,
right, right.
oh, I could film other people all day, but
I get
like,
it.
and then it's just like, it's like, what am I gonna talk about? Like, I'm
I
kind of
get it.
boring.
Yeah, I get it.
I like,
And so yeah, that's how I got into content creation. And
yeah.
talking about money, I was making salary when I worked in Norway, which is another thing
Okay.
that is just different. You don't really get paid hourly. And so I think I was making something to the effect of like $3,400 a month as a line cook basically. And part of that was like you got
That's
taxed on that.
USD.
Yeah, in USD. And you got taxed on that because it was like you got basically healthcare covered for you, which was a, welcome change for me, because like I had this one time when I cut my finger pretty bad and I got to just like
I didn't
go into
even
the
think about that
hospital.
aspect of it. That if
Yeah.
you just don't have health care unless you're salaried.
Yeah, totally. And so I had this one time where I cut my finger and I had to go to the hospital and they did a bunch of stuff on my hand. And I think I had to pay like $11 coming out of that experience. And it was for like some weird medical supply that they had to use to clot my blood. Anyways, so and then I bumped that from like 3,400 a month to like 38 or 3,900 a month when I became a sous chef, which was
Okay.
really not that big of a boost. Um,
How much
and
cheaper was Norway compared to the US, or is it about the same?
that was another big benefit, is that I was again living with a roommate. And so I think at the end of the day, and this is just a personal finance quip just in general, is it's not necessarily how much you're making, it's the delta between how much you're making and how much you're spending.
Had you
And so
at
I
this
think
point read the 4 Hour Work Week yet, or no?
yes, I absolutely had, because I
Okay.
read the 4 Hour Work Week in Napa, and we can get to that if you want. Absolutely. But like the delta of what I was saving every month was something like $1,800 a month. Like I was making 3,900 and I would like struggle to spend 1,500 a month,
Yeah,
because it
so
was
you
like
probably
I was
felt like you
making
were balling.
39,
Yeah.
my rent was like 800 or 900, and so then I still had 3,000, and then again I wasn't basically spending any money on groceries. And so it was
Yeah.
like my day-to-day expenses were like maybe $500 a month. And so I was like I had 2,500 left over. And so yeah, there were months when I would absolutely save $2,500 a month and I would just keep it in cash. And then yeah, it would come up to like, oh cool, I have a week vacation, I'm going to go to Japan, I'm going to go to my friend and I went to Cape Town, South Africa, we went to Dubai. Like there was so many cool travel experiences that I was able to have, because of both the fact that I was not spending a lot of money because I was working so much, and because of the fact that I had more vacation time than I was really used to at the time.
So, because I'm trying to just get through the whole timeline, just so that we
Yeah,
can circle back on some things. But like,
yeah, yeah.
so after Norway, how long were you in Norway? And
A, a little over 3 years in Norway.
Okay.
And
And that was
so
in that same job, but you
that
just
was
got
in the
like
same job.
bumped
Yeah.
up.
So I just got bumped up. So I started as a chef de partie. And then after 10 months, I was like running a station, like the highest station in the brigade. And then I got asked to be a sous chef. And then I managed the kitchen for like a little over a year and a half.
Was that job inherently less stressful because it was overseas and that's part of the culture, or was it inherently less stressful, or could you find a job like that here in the US?
I could have absolutely found a job like that in the US. The big things that I prioritized with the kitchen in Norway was I didn't want to be on the Michelin circuit basically anymore. I wanted,
Mm-hmm.
and Leesverket has a Michelin star now. They didn't have a star when I was working there. And I liked that. I liked the fact that there wasn't the pressure of, are we going to retain our star? But it was still fine dining. Like we still executed Michelin quality food. We were, for all intents and purposes, the best restaurant in Bergen for a really long time. It was just Michelin Guide when I moved there didn't even exist in Bergen. There wasn't any other stars in the city. Then they started to come to the city. Then they started to recommend restaurants. Then they gave their first star to another restaurant in town, and then ultimately Leesverket got the star. But I liked the fact that I was working with like other really talented professionals. Like my sous chef was this guy who used to be a sous chef at a 3-star in Paris. And my station partner was this guy who used to work at a 2-star in Amsterdam. And so I was working with these guys who were still incredibly talented and skilled. It's like they also had the same goals as me. They didn't want to be working at like this super prim and polished Michelin starred kitchen. And I really liked that. Um, could I have found a place like that in the US? Probably, but it wouldn't have had the benefits that I would have had with like the vacation time and the ability to travel in the way that I wanted to prioritize at that stage in my career. And so, in some aspects, the kitchen culture aspect, maybe, but I don't think on some of the other elements I would have been able to find that.
Yeah, there seems to be this like really attractive thing about Europe and just the way that people kind of like live their lives more, and you work so you can exist, not exist so you can work.
Right, right.
So that so that's interesting that you bring all this up because it's stuff I've thought about as well.
Mm.
Um, so then from Norway you get kind of homesick
Yeah,
and you want to come
100%.
back.
It was another feeling of stagnation if I really analyze it and look back, right? Because I was running the kitchen, I was writing the tasting menus with the chef owner. It wasn't like my restaurant in any respect, but like he had also gotten into a season in his career, the chef owner, Chef Chris, where he was starting to get TV deals and he was starting to
Mm.
become like a personality of his own in Norway. And so he was getting asked to like go to London or like go do this dinner or, you know, like go host
Yeah, so
this
you're
thing. Like
like,
I
I
need to be
kind of want
filming.
that.
Yeah. He's like, I need to be filming today. And so he's like, I just need you to send me a email or send me a text message update with like how everything's going. Because it was, and you know, like that was really beneficial for me from a leadership perspective to basically feel like I was running a restaurant, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Because there would be times when I wouldn't see him for like a week and a half. He would just go travel and then he would come back and he'd be like, oh, Chef Chris is back. Hey, Chef Chris, how's it going?
Hmm.
And so that was really cool from the sense of me really stepping into my own as a leader and running a brigade. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I,
So then,
yeah, go ahead.
so what was the max amount that you made in that, and what was your like the last title that you had there?
Yeah, yeah. So executive sous chef was like my last title that I had, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the amount that I can't remember what the yearly amount was because I was like so month to month from that perspective, and so yeah, like I said, it was like around 3,900 a month that I maxed out at. I don't think I ever made more than 4,000 a month there, which
Okay.
again is like less than 40 grand a year.
Okay, and then when you were like, okay, I want the next step, I want to come back to the States. I know you mentioned that you liked Seattle because of the weather, but were there any other reasons that you came to Seattle or?
Yeah, it was the girlfriend that I had at the time. She's my wife now, and her and I were basically talking about like, okay, cool. You're finishing up with school. I'm finishing up this chapter of like going and working in restaurants. we both want to finally move in together, and we want to kind of like settle upon a city that is practical and allows for career opportunities for us.
How were you all dealing with you living in Norway? Was she just visiting really often, or did she move
No,
in with you?
no. So she was again still in school, and so we would just FaceTime with like an 8 or 9 hour time difference. And so it actually worked out really well because again, she was working crazy hours of studying and being in residency, and I was working crazy hours running this kitchen. And so it just the time worked out really well where like she would wake up, I think, right before we were heading into service. And so right
So you
after
had a little bit
staff
of time.
meal, I would always
Yeah.
FaceTime her. And then
Okay.
when I was getting done with work, it was like right as she was finishing up with her classwork. And so we would FaceTime again after I got done with work.
One question that I had is in Norway when you had started the content creation stuff, but were you making any money at all on the content
On
creation
content,
stuff?
no, absolutely not. I was so far off from making
It was
content,
just
and
for funsies.
it was just for documentation purposes. And I knew that again I needed to pay down this ignorance debt of like I knew I needed to hire a videographer someday for this like content creation slash restaurant slash kitchen studio concept that I wanted to have. So I was like, I need to learn how to do this so that when I hire somebody, I know how to evaluate their performance. That was basically the mentality there. And then
Okay.
to your question that you asked about like why did you choose Seattle, it was because my wife could have had cooler opportunities in Seattle than the other offer she was getting like in Iowa where she went to school. I wanted to move to New York because I was like, I'm really going to go
Made
for it
sense.
now. And it was like, again, bringing it full circle, I didn't get to cook it per se. And so I really had this, like, I still want to cook in New York kind of mentality. She was getting cool job offers also in North Carolina, which like didn't have as robust of a food scene as I would have wanted. And so Seattle ticked enough boxes for us where it was like
It just
it
made
had a
sense.
reasonable food scene. Both of us could get good jobs. There was enough like tech money here for me to like even if I needed to just become a private chef for somebody, I had the ability to do that. And so
Yeah.
from a practical sense, we committed to Seattle for a year and we were like, let's try it, let's see if we like it.
What year
And we're
was this? Like
this is
20?
2017,
Okay,
2016,
it's
2017. And so
somewhat
it's been
recently.
8 years almost now. And we just bought a house here. So we really, really like it. Um, and so, yeah, that's why Seattle.
Cool. So then in Seattle, what job did you land on?
So a couple. Again, this is really getting in the weeds of like financial stuff. And so I wanted to really lean into the content creation side of things and pop-ups. Those were my two goals. I was like, I want to build a personal brand and I in the industry, like a real industry brand,
Yeah.
like that is respected by cooks and sous chefs from around the world. And I also want to again figure out my food. What does my Justin's food look like? Make a name for yourself in Seattle. And so the problem was the pop-ups were so irregular because they were so much work to
Yep.
put together
Sounds
that
like it.
they weren't making enough money, really. Like basically they were like break-even projects. And
Yeah.
the content creation, my audience was so small and niche that wasn't making any money either. And so the thing that I did to supplement that was I got a job on a food truck, believe it or not. And so there's this guy named Joel who had this food truck called Wicked Good Grinders. It was a gold sparkling food truck with red text on it. And they did East Coast style sandwiches. And so chicken parm, meatball subs, steak and cheese, chopped chicken and cheese. And I saw
It's
the
like
job posting, I think, on Craigslist. And I sent him a message and I said, hey, here's my resume. I'm really interested in, like applying as a cook on your food truck because you're hiring. And I met with him in person and he looked at my resume and he said, what the fuck are you doing? You're way too overqualified for this job. And I said, listen, man, I just want to like, again, still keep my street cred. I want to continue to cook, but I don't want a management position because I don't want the stress of needing to get the phone call on a Saturday afternoon and say, hey, you need to come in because the purveyor for this thing didn't show up. So I didn't want the management responsibilities. I didn't want 60 hours a week. I said, I want something that's part-time that can just pay my bills. And I want it to be something where I can basically like not be needed. I want to like have it be a little bit irregular where like I can work a couple of lunch services through for you throughout the week because I have a pop-up coming up on Saturday, basically is how
yeah.
I
So
want
you
it to be.
wanted the flexibility, basically.
Yeah. So I think at that job it was 15.50 an hour is what I was getting paid.
And how many hours were you getting? Like, were you full time or
Somewhere
just?
between like 20 and 35 a week. Like I wasn't ever hitting 40, but I never
That
really
sounds
went
perfect for
under.
just like doing that as a day job while you get the other stuff under wraps.
Totally. The problem was like I continued to live that like lifestyle that I had in Norway. And so I wasn't
Mm,
quite making as much as I was making in Norway, but I was spending more. And so
Seattle's
like
really expensive.
yeah, from a personal finance perspective, it's like that's where the rubber really met the road for me. And so I started to accumulate kind of a lot of debt, which was really unfortunate.
Mm,
Um and so that was hard because it was like I was spending money on camera equipment and I was like wanting to front expenses for pop-ups when the ticket money hadn't come in yet. And it was like, oh shoot, I have to be saving this money for taxes because I own an LLC now and I need to pay those.
yep.
And so practically speaking, there was a lot of stuff where I think the max I'd never quite hit like 5 figures of debt, but it was like bumping on that. It was like getting really close to like the amount of money I'm bringing in. There's never going to be a month where I get enough money and save enough money where I can pay off this debt all in one go. And so then I was like, oh my goodness, something needs to change. And so then I started to pursue like consulting opportunities. There was two chefs that I ended up working for here in Seattle. One, it was this guy named Eric Rivera. He has kind of like gotten a lot of flack on social media lately because he did this really funny post about like Japanese izakaya food and fusion. Anyways, we don't have to maybe spend too much time on that, but he was trying to do a Pacific Northwest tasting menu that was like 19 courses, and he needed someone to like develop the tasting menu with him. And he was working at a hotel at the time here in Seattle, downtown in Belltown. And so I joined his team to basically like help him build out that tasting menu, that extensive, like as many ingredients that could be sourced from the Pacific Northwest as possible. And he, funny enough, used to be the head of R&D at Alinea. And so he was basically hiring me to be his head of R&D as kind of
Hmm.
like, like his chef tester guy. And so I took that for a couple months. And then I also was working for this chef named Bella Sanger, and she has a Indian food packaged food company called Sri Bella. And her family and my family, my Indian family, are from the same area of northern India. And so I felt a lot of like connection there to like help her develop her first line of Indian packaged foods. And then they partnered with Amazon. And so that was really cool because I was getting to see, that side of things. And
Like product
both,
development side.
yeah, product development,
Mm.
marketing, branding, all of that sorts of stuff. And so both of those jobs kind of like got me up and out of the financial hole that I was in because I was able to charge more, because I was like really getting into the weeds and really using my brain a little bit more so
Hmm.
than just like helping or cooking on a food truck kind of thing. And so that was really, really beneficial. And then I, again, met that business partner. We started the event production company. Then I was really on salary. I was a business owner.
When did you get your first, like, even if it was a tiny amount? Because I think that YouTube check is like, I think that you need to reach like $100 or something. Like, when
Yeah.
was the first time that you got paid for the content creation side?
I think it was right when I hit like 8,000 subscribers, 7,000 subscribers, something like that.
And how did
And
that
I
make you
had,
feel? Were you like,
um, it was almost, it wasn't the feeling that I think most people get when they get that check. I think the feeling that I got more for that like making money online thing was I think the first time that I got a sponsorship check was a little bit more of a feeling of elation. And then if we really talk about like the first times that I was getting people to like download templates that I had made, or like book me for coaching calls, or like the first time that I launched the first iteration of Total Station Nomination and I got sales for that, signups for that,
yeah,
that was like total game changer. And it was like, whoa, I just made money on the internet kind of feeling. The YouTube check is like, it's so
that's not
small.
the part. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like it might have been amortized across like 80 days or 90 days, kind of thing, where it's like,
Yeah.
holy cow, it took me 90 days to make $100. Like that's embarrassing, like this is never going to work. Like and that's the type of feedback loop where like you don't want to pour more into that because it's such an uphill climb to get to like, let's say $5,000 a month is what you need. I'm so practically minded from that of like, holy cow, I need to 50x my output in order to reach this. Like I'm never like, there's no world where I'm ever going to be able to make that work.
That was one takeaway that I saw in one of your videos is that you said that the $5,000 was like the number you were trying to reach. That was like,
Yes.
I guess, what you deciphered you needed to live. So, how did you go on about being like, how can I make this like fully committed as a business owner?
Yeah, I don't think it ever really hit the stride of there was actually a $5,000 consistent month for probably like the first 2 years that I lived in Seattle. It was always this weird, kind of like if you were to plot it out on a graph, it would be like $1,500 a month, and then $4,500 the next month, and then $3,000 the next month, and then the next month would be like $9,000 a month, right?
Yeah, and
Because it was the common.
you feel like, oh man, I feel
Yeah, this is
this
awesome.
amazing.
But at the same time, you're like, shoot, I have to pay off this like $1,800 credit card bill that I have, and I have to like pay this purveyor who's expecting a check
Yeah,
from me. And then at the end of the day, you're like, okay, well, I'm back down at zero. And part of it was like, I wanted to finally start saving for retirement. Because again, I was finally flipping the switch to I'm no longer in the season of learning. I'm still learning, of course, but it's like I need to transition myself into a season of earning. Like I need to start to leverage my time. I need to start to really ask myself, what is my ambitious hourly rate going to be? What is going to be what I can like develop from a relationship perspective with clients? How am I going to monetize an audience? Like, am I going to
yeah.
launch a product? Like all these questions start to swirl. And that was actually really beneficial for me to like have that pressure on myself, saving for retirement, like all these sorts of things.
Well, I personally think retirement's a little bit overrated, but it
Yeah.
might be because
Interesting
I'm like
take.
pretty young. But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just like, it's a little overrated in the sense that I'm like, okay, so you get to like 65 and you just go make birdhouses or something. Like,
Well, I approach it like just as a PSA for folks. I have two parents whose health has not been so great. I lost my mom in June, so a little over 6 months ago,
mhm.
and my dad has been in assisted living for a little over 2 years now. And the benefit for him is like he's getting Social Security, but at the same time, like he is definitely having to live off of funds that he saved for retirement to pay for his assisted living. Like
Yeah.
that is just how it is, and it's not cheap either. And so none of us like to think of ourselves as like, oh, I'm going to end up in a home, because obviously that's not what's ideal. But there will be a
Hopefully, I have
day.
some kids that will take
Yeah,
me.
that too, who will take care of you. Like you will reach a point when you can't make as much money as you could in your 40s and 50s. That's just the
Yeah.
reality for most people. And so if you're going to get to that point and you're going to say, well, 65 is going to be when I build birdhouses, not understanding the fact that like you might need to still continue to pay the mortgage on your house that you owe, or,
Yeah.
like whatever it happens to be. If you have nothing, it's like, that's really bad. Number one. Number two, the benefits of compounding only exist when you give it a long enough time horizon to actually compound. And so if you start early enough, you will actually see the benefits, versus if you start saving for your 65 age retirement at 50, it's like you're only giving yourself 15 years to compound. You're not going to see the as many benefits.
A couple questions. So it's kind of convoluted. And I know that you're spinning a lot of plates at once, but
Right.
how did you decide like what to give attention to? How did you
Mm.
decide like what were you like? Okay, I need to develop a product. Like, let me do an ebook or what products did you come up with? Why did you decide that like okay, like I got to focus on the content creation thing? So like just run me through all of that basically.
So when I moved to Seattle, I created what I called a portfolio of opportunities. And this is kind of stealing some language from like the VC world, where venture capitalists will put money into 18 different companies, basically with the expectation that 17 of them are going to go to zero. And then one of those 18 is going to become a unicorn and pay for all of the losses of the other ones.
Yeah.
And that's effectively the strategy that I took when I moved to Seattle, and I said, I'm going to do my own thing, because I knew I wanted to do something different. I wanted this confluence of different disciplines, but I didn't know, is Justin going to own a food media production studio? Or is it going to be Justin does product reviews on things that are meant for the hospitality industry? Or is it going to be Justin has a film crew like yourself following me around as I do pop-ups throughout the city
Yeah, like the
in
Food
weird,
Network style.
interesting environments?
Mhm.
Totally. Is it going to be I'm going to go into this restaurant consulting thing and I'm going to help chefs really operationalize their ideas and get their tasting menu up and off the ground. I didn't know what was going to work. And so
You
what I
just
did
had to
was I tried my best at all of
throw
them,
stuff at the wall.
throw it at the wall, and I ultimately landed on teaching is the thing that is the kind of ikigai, Venn diagram of all of the things that like the world needs and I can make money off of and people need, and all of those that I'm good at, like all of those things. No check from a consulting client gives me the same feeling as somebody who just enrolled in my culinary program telling me, "Oh my God, you helped me get my first job." Like, just for me on a personal level, there's no comparison. And so that was kind of the really hard work. And there was, to be honest with you, Cam, like there was no one moment where I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to pivot. It was like, okay, I equate it a lot. Like I grew up playing a lot of video games, and in certain
Me
video
too.
games, yeah, cool. So like in certain video games, your character gets plopped onto the map, and on the top corner of your screen, the map is only shown as what is seen by your character, and the rest of the map is black.
I
And so what?
literally use that to describe stuff. Like where I'm
Yes,
like
yes,
I've just started seeing a lot of the US this year, and like I'm like, oh, I feel like, because I had never been to California before and just went to LA, and I'm like, I feel like I just unlocked that part of the map. Like,
yes, yes. And I needed to spend time uncovering and showing my character, if we think of life as a video game, to as many areas of the map as possible. And once I was in that area of the map, I could see what is the terrain like in this area, and do I like consulting and client work, and do I like this element of customer service, and do I like having to schlep everything together for an event as a pop-up in this middle of nowhere place? Do I like being a personality on camera for this like branded photo shoot thing?
yep, yep, yep,
Do
yep.
What do I like and what do I not like? And that, again, from the sense of like, I think a lot of people in hindsight will tell you the like rose-colored glasses version of like, I knew exactly what I wanted to do from the jump, and they don't include this part of the story, the part where you're like, you tried to throw spaghetti at a wall and genuinely see what stuck. And so I got to the place where I was like, again, the feeling of making money online is unmatched in my opinion when we're talking about money making.
Yep.
The personal satisfaction and fulfillment that I got from genuinely helping somebody through an educational product that I created was incredible. 3, the margins on my educational products in particular are like over 90%. And so it's like, from the work in, profit out perspective, it's like I was thinking about starting a family. I didn't want to be on that like crazy grind. Like I still love working, but I didn't want to be in the place where I was like, didn't get to spend time with my family, didn't get to continue to travel, had to sacrifice my relationships, wasn't getting to, just be like, I take care of my health more than I ever have in my career. And so being able to prioritize all of those things off the back of like actually making a profit was really, really beneficial. And then just like silly legacy, like connection moments. I don't know. Like I went to this conference, a marketing conference in Boise. I go every year, and I got to talk to genuinely someone who works at one of the software companies that I run my company off of. And I told them about what it is that I do for the industry and the product that I have and how I use the piece of software that this person happens to work at. And they're like, wow, you're like actually making something for people that use it. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said something to the effect of like, well, most people use our product to like, they make courses for other course creators to make courses for other course creators, right? And it was like, oh, like I actually have a product that appeals to a genuinely interested subsection of this niche that actually needs what it is that I'm offering. And I was like, that really also like stuck with me in my head of like, oh, well, you're on the right track here.
If you were to break down what your current salary and just your
Yeah.
business is like into like a pie chart, is just like where's money coming from basically?
Yeah. So I was reasonably transparent with this, I think, in a video that I did on my channel. It was a like 2023 playbook, I think that I did. Um, it was a 2022 retrospective, basically, where I looked
Yeah.
back at 2022 and I kind of broke down more or less. And I'm super happy to repeat it here. I I will caveat this with saying I want to change this for 2024. And so
Okay.
part of me talking about this in a very public way was trying to hold myself accountable to like, this is what I was able to achieve, but this is what I want to shift things towards. And so I'll go back to 2022. My business had cracked. It was almost, it had definitely cracked $170,000 for the year. And the pie chart for that was like something like 30% sponsorships. I think it was like 40% in-person dinners and like stuff like that. 20% consulting. And then I think 10% like checks from Amazon
You.
affiliate and YouTube
Yeah.
channel and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a little bit off, but for all intents and purposes, let's say that the consulting and the like my own product, like total station nomination, was like that 20%, something like that.
Which
My
the total
goal,
station nomination, that's like like
it's
just
like an
because like
online
I don't.
course,
Okay.
effectively. Yep. So it's a 9-week program that I take people through.
Did you
It includes
create that whole
coaching with
course
me.
yourself, or did you
Yeah,
hire a
yeah.
team to help you?
Nope, it was just me. The one person that I have hired, she works with tons of other creators, but she basically has the software product that I use to basically give students a snapshot of what their performance is like on their station at their restaurant that they're working at. And
Yeah.
so that's the only person that I've ever worked with on the product, but everything else is original stuff from me. And so basically the goal that I want is I want to be able to obviously increase that top line number, but I want the percentage to be like 80% total station nomination as a product. And then 20% is like fun sponsorship things that like I genuinely want to take, or like consulting things that like I am so stoked to be able to work with this person as a client and be able to help them in their organization or whatever it is that they're working on creatively, that I want to say yes to this. I effectively wanted to eliminate the in-person dinner things, so
Yeah.
much so that like, oh my God, like it gives me like high blood pressure talking about like, I think in March of last year, so a little over a year ago, I had gotten a bunch of requests to do in-person dinner stuff. And I think the total amount of contracts that I was being asked to do was like over 50 grand of
Wow.
people that were asking me to do things. And
And they are
I
they
had
just kind of finding you on YouTube and they're like, we want this guy.
like one, like my real estate agent who sold us our house, he had somebody reach out and was like, hey, we're doing this gala dinner and we need a chef for it, so do you know anybody? And so my real estate agent hooked me up with this guy who was like, it was like a $25,000 dinner, and he was like, you know, my wife and I have a baby on the way and I'm saying no to $50,000 in revenue. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's not to say that I would make a bunch of money on the
But again,
back
it's
end
it's
of
it's
that,
time. It's like,
and it's
and
time
it's
away from this
building.
thing that I
Yeah.
want,
Yeah.
which is like, I want my business's P&L to look different. And if
Yeah.
I continue saying yes to the quick money and the easy money and the money that I know how to make, I'm never going to spend the time in order to build this thing that is going to actually give me the financial returns that I want and the work life, you know, relationship that I want.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was really hard, but I know that I knew that I needed to do it.
Because it does get to the point where money is, I mean, not money, time is just more valuable than like just
Yes.
getting some dollar signs. So two questions on the sponsorships. One, what's the craziest like sponsorship deal that you've gotten? If you're, I guess you don't have to disclose the brand, but just like, was there a digit where you're like, oh my god, like, do you want to pay me that much to talk about your product? And
Yeah.
then second question is, are there any dream brands that you have where
Mm.
you're like, okay, like reach out to me, like I'll.
So a couple come to mind. I think there's two kind of versions of that sponsorship crazy eyes bulging out of your skull question. One is like the sponsorship where the dollar amount and the amount of effort or time required is just like astronomical. And I think the highest that I've ever reached there, I think I did the math, it was something like $5,000 an hour, where it was like the amount that it was something crazy like that, where I was, the amount of time that I had to spend compared to the amount that I was making on the back end was, I
Yeah.
think, somewhere between that $4,000 and $5,000 just for an hour of time. That was crazy. And then the other one was like the again, the relationship between it was just like the total size of the sponsorship contract was like over, I think 4 months was like 25 grand, something like that.
Yeah.
And again, there's deliverables that are associated with that. So when you amortize it all the way out, it actually does make a lot of sense for that brand to be, like working in
Yeah,
that
just how much
capacity
money
because
are they
they got
making
a
off
ton
of
of
you?
content. Yeah, yeah, something like that. But like when you really do the math and you actually put it in an email and you send it to the brand and you're saying, hey, over the course of these next X time frame, this is the size of this total contract. That's a little bit of a weird feeling, right? Because you remember 25 grand over the course of a couple of months, I used to be making like a little over 30 grand in a year.
Yeah,
And so it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
that discrepancy is weird to just, I guess, visualize and talk about.
So,
And then
so do you currently reach out to brands yourself, like, or
not
they
so
kind
much
of just come to
anymore.
you?
Yeah, like in the year 2022 when I was like really going for sponsorship things because I was like, this is the jam. I
Mm-hmm.
would either reach out to the brand from a cold email perspective using those skills. I would either just have them find me because I had such a unique kind of like niche in the video creation space that I was filling on the internet. Or I would do the strategy of like, hey, I'm kind of interested in having you sponsor the channel. Can I interview your CEO for the podcast? And then the CEO comes on the show. They get to know what I'm all about. And then at the end of that, it's like, hey, here's the episode. Thanks for so much for coming on. The goal was not exclusively to get them to do a sponsorship thing. But then it's
Yeah,
like, hey, just so you
multi-purpose.
know, like I have this channel. Look at all these cool comments that came through on our conversation. If you would ever be interested in sponsoring, like let's talk, kind of thing. And so there's a little bit of a like reciprocal nature to this of like I want to share your brand story with my audience, and it's like if you want to continue to engage with these people who watch my stuff, it's like I think it might make sense from a business perspective for us to work together. So trying to be practical there. And then like dream brands, I don't know, like you get to a place where I am like to think of myself as being reasonably good at like making product reviews and putting myself in the shoes of a line cook because of my experience and being able to really break something down and say, this is useful because of XYZ reasons. Here's why this matters. This detail was really interesting that they added, that type of thing. And if I'm looking at like the thing that I'm fiddling around with as we're talking, this is like a Sharpie. Like I've used Sharpie for years in professional kitchens as like everybody has a Sharpie on them to like label. And I asked myself like, would I like to work with Sharpie as a brand? And it's like to talk about this pen in a video, like do a review video on this pen, maybe not in that respect. But I think about like, would I get excited of just like videos that I genuinely want to make, like my breakdowns of The Bear on Hulu, right? I do those videos and most of them don't have sponsors. If I could have like a brand that I genuinely liked be like, we just want a 60-second ad read of our product being talked about in this video that you're already making. Cause that's another like talk about stressful place that I got to with content creation and sponsors is like, I pigeonholed myself into I couldn't do a 60-second ad read in any of my videos because my sponsor integrations were so in depth where I would talk about their products and talk about the features and show myself using the product where it was like it was not the type of sponsorship relationship that was beneficial for good content production and output on my channel
Yeah.
because it was this weird amalgamation of video that Justin really wants to make and is excited about producing that has no sponsor, and then the next video is like basically an ad, right? Like it's an in-depth review
But for
of
free.
this product.
Yeah.
And then the next video is video that Justin genuinely wants to make with no sponsor. And so I was living this weird double life where I was like
Yep.
constantly juggling these two types of projects. And I didn't feel like I could put my whole self into either of them because, yeah, for I think obvious reasons.
So going forward, you're focused more on your own brand and your own products.
My own educational products. And the goal there is to basically build out a suite of educational products for hospitality professionals that genuinely helps them in their careers, shows tangible and practical progress for them, and then use that to basically be the back end operational infrastructure for a restaurant group in my 40s. That's basically my goal.
So you still have dreams of starting a restaurant.
100%. But I want it to be funded by this high margin business that I build that is
Mm-hmm.
an online education business. And so I want to get that up and off the ground, and then I want that to be like fully spinning and humming, being a machine. And then I'm going to get to a place where like I have this big network of alumni who have gotten value from the educational products that I put out there. And I'm going to hopefully have a little bit of a reputation in the industry for like genuinely being principled in how I think about work. And I'm just going to be able to hire people that have come through my programs. And again, this is like a little bit of a back of the napkin how the business model is going to work. It's obviously going to be way harder than this, but I still don't think that anything quite compares to going out to a restaurant and eating either just as a solo diner or with loved ones. And so I want to continue to have that be something that exists in the world. I think thinking about the death of restaurants or restaurants not being a thing anymore makes me really, really sad. And then I combine that with the fact of I genuinely think that I have come full circle with myself from a maturity perspective of I don't need to be the chef that's on the pass every single night. I can be the owner and I can be a productive leader in a restaurant group versus I have to be the tyrannical, maniacal chef whose creative vision must be adhered to. And I have to be the one who's like putting the herbs on the plate with tweezers every single night because I want a restaurant group more so than a successful singular restaurant. That's like a big mental shift that I had to make for myself. In 2010, Justin wanted a 3-star Michelin restaurant because of what it said about Justin.
Yeah.
I think 2040 Justin is much more so thinking about like, what is the restaurant group going to be able to do from a, like, how can it impact a community? How can it actually like provide careers to a vast swath of people? How can it actually be the proof of the pudding that your educational products actually work? How can you like build positive culture in the industry and pay people well in a way that you weren't able to receive when you were coming up in the industry? And how many ripple effects does that cause with like people that came through my kitchen ultimately go off and start their own cool thing? And this can ultimately backfire. I acknowledge that, from the sense of people will come through my kitchen and they will go off and try to do their own thing, not having done the work that I did to build this high margin education company that's funding the whole thing.
And then not be
And
able
then
to
they're
do
going to
it.
say, oh shoot, like that really fucked with me. And I hated working for Justin Khanna because he had it, you know what I mean? Like
Easy.
he had it easy because he was
Yeah.
like, he was making all this money off of this, you know, like tech play that he did and I didn't have that. So how in the world am I supposed to compete with that? And so I acknowledge that this could all backfire, but it's
I
like
think
when I think,
I think the model works. I think it seems like a good idea for sure. And I feel like it's just good for your life. Like it would just provide you with a lot of freedom to do what you love, but also the freedom to just kind of have something to rely on.
and provide opportunities to other people. Like that also gets me really excited. And when I think about like other creative things that could be done with restaurants that just don't currently exist, I'm curious if I can pull some of them off. And so I've mentioned this in some other interviews that I've done, but like restaurants make such slim margins just being
Yeah,
standalone businesses.
I've heard about that, which is kind of sad because
It is,
I love food.
but when that's your only source of income, you have to rely on that 6%, 7%, 9% profit that you're making as a restaurant. And you're like, yeah, I'll take it. But is there a world where if I started a restaurant group, could I operate the individual restaurants as nonprofits? Why has nobody tried that yet? Because it's like nonprofits get a bunch of
You're
support.
giving away all your ideas.
Hey, listen, another, you know, maybe lesson for your audience is like, that is such a, like, if you're going to make me sign an NDA before you tell me about your company, it's like, I'm kind
You
of
don't
not
want to hear about
interested.
it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not interested, you know, because it's like ideas are so like, that's the trope,
It's
right?
execution.
It's execution. And so if restaurants could function as nonprofits, it's like now there's no kind of like animosity from worker to management or owner, because it's like, hey, listen, nobody's coming out ahead from the sense of like, we're having crazy profits this year and the employees are still making $11 an hour kind of thing. It's like everything can literally just be funneled back into the business. There's less pressure on everybody all the way around. And it's not to say that you're like going to run it into the ground from the sense of you're just going to waste everything and just frivolous spending on stuff, because we're a nonprofit, so we don't have to make money. But it's like, if you can get as close as possible to break even as a nonprofit, I mean, like, what does that give you the ability to do? And then how would I have the ability to have like an online plus in person, do you know what I mean, execution of my education business? I think that there's a lot of interesting stuff there that I'm trying to explore. And
How are you going to go on about your future content? Like, it seems like from your latest TikToks and stuff that you're really playing into like kind of doing pop culture reviews that are relating to food. So like stuff like
right,
the bear.
right.
Is
I
that
think
something you're
that
going to lean more into?
I think from a top of funnel awareness perspective, I think that there's something to that I think I've found a reasonable amount of success from.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose the industry audience though. There's a author that I follow named David Perel, and he has this idea of niche fame, where you don't want to have like Jake Gyllenhaal levels of fame, where you walk down the street and you can't because everybody's swarming you and trying to get a
Yeah.
photo because you're Leonardo DiCaprio or something. But at the same time, you also don't want to be so well known in your field to this really tiny group of people, where like you have a niche, but it's like only your coworkers know about you. You want both. You want fame, but you want niche fame. You want like the people that know to know you and to like respect you, get value from you, to follow you, to support you. And that's really what I'm trying to push for. And so it is a little bit of a push outside my comfort zone to like, again, be more pop culture related. But when I really think about the bear has only blown up because of like season 2. Season 1, like when I first published my Pro Chef Reacts to the Bear video on YouTube, it was still this like underground thing that like
Yeah.
nobody really knew anything about it. And then because of the success of Jeremy Allen White and the Golden Globes and all of those sorts of things, it has blown up into this kind of like cultural phenomenon.
There's a
But
lot of memes too
tons of
surrounding
memes.
that show.
Also, I don't cover the show from in a way that most content creators do, because a lot of people will watch it and they'll talk about the
Yeah, the
lighting
actual
or the
show.
quality of the acting or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
again, like the oh my god, this food looks insane. I'm trying to genuinely provide value to like someone who is budding to getting into the industry and is
Unless I
like,
haven't like looked that deeply, you don't really do like cooking on your channel.
no,
Is
not
there a
anymore.
reason for that you don't want to do recipes and stuff?
Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of the recipe game, just from the sense of like I haven't seen it convert in a way that I really get excited about. I also don't think that it genuinely translates into
You
providing
don't want to
value
be
for my
like
audience.
binging Babish or something. Like he has knives and stuff that he makes now.
He totally does. But again, I ask myself, and I think any creative should ask themselves, like, is this what you want your business to look like? Like, is anybody going around and saying, Babish's knives are the best knives that I've ever cooked with,
I
or are
actually
they
have some
genuinely
of his
excited?
knives. I like
You
them.
do, okay,
Yeah,
and but
they're
well,
good.
that's and that's kind of the punchline is that they're good, but it's like, would you
I don't know
you
if like
bought them?
if I was a chef like in a kitchen like, but for
Sure,
me
would you
for like
flex
a
your Babish knives?
yeah,
Maybe,
yeah, yeah,
maybe
no,
not. But
as a home cook, I'm like, oh, they're pretty good.
I mean, you bought the knives because you like Babish more so than like I wanted these specific knives, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, I
again,
like his
correct me
show,
if I'm
and
wrong there, but like
yeah, I
I
like his
think
show, and he showed it off, and I was like, oh, give it a shot. I
I
think it
mean
was
you
on
can
Amazon too, and that made it even easier.
you compare that with this other YouTuber named Nick Bear. He has a kind of like protein and pre-workout, and he's like a hybrid athlete. Like he runs and he lifts weights. Like he'll run a
Hmm.
sub 3 hour marathon and he also does powerlifting. Most people don't know that BPN, his supplements company, is his company. Like there is just it is a good company in its own right. I would buy this pre-workout even if it wasn't Nick Bear's, because I genuinely like get value from this product.
Yeah,
That's the type of company that I want to own, because again, it's not so reliant on Justin being the face of it. And so again,
But it's a
everybody has
perk
different.
because it
Yeah,
brings
it is.
people
It is.
to,
And compare this with the Justin who was like not making any money on making
yeah.
content. And I would much rather be making at least something rather than nothing. But yeah, I think everybody should constantly be asking themselves like, what happens if this goes right? Because I think a lot of us are in like the mitigation and loss prevention, mindset. But what happens if this really is a knocking itself out of the park? And I make this product that like maybe I'm not all that excited about, or I slap my logo on this
And then
thing
it just like
and it blows
pops.
up, and
Yeah.
it's like, is that really what you want? I don't know. Do you
I
really
would
want to be
I would
known
buy
for
your
that?
knives if you made some.
Sure, but then I ask myself like,
So
what's
I'd be your
missing?
I'd
Well,
be
I
your
ask
one.
myself what's missing. I am such a product minded person. The reason that I feel confident creating a specialized culinary program is because I genuinely feel like a crash course in how to work in a restaurant is missing in the industry.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's something on the knife side that is missing where I'm like,
Probably
I
not.
can provide a unique feature or perspective or design tweak to this. Now, we talk about aprons. I absolutely have an apron product in my head that like when I wear it in cooking videos, people ask me about.
Yeah, I
And
think that there's always going to be something, right?
there's
Especially
always
like
something.
and what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation was like I don't think that ideas are novel. It's just about your execution to them.
100%.
So yeah, sure, maybe there's not like an inherently unique knife, but maybe your presentation is like really awesome. Like maybe it's really colorful and it appeals to like young moms. I don't know.
Yep.
Like I feel like you
Yep.
could like really just niche it down to like be something unique. You mentioned that you didn't have like the time to do it when you were working 80 hours a week, so I wanted to ask like and a couple questions. I mean like how difficult is it to like maintain a certain physique when your job is food?
Yeah. The meme that goes around in the industry is if you want to lose weight, work in a restaurant. And kind of not to explain that joke a little bit too far, but most people think like, oh, you're working in a restaurant, you're surrounded by all this good food all the time. Aren't you going to gain weight? And the reality is because you're literally on your feet for 12 hours a day. And I'm not joking. Like you maybe sit for 25 minutes out of a 12-hour day. And you're not just on your feet, but you're moving. And because you're so busy, you're like missing meals. And so it's like you're in a calorie deficit in two ways, through the calories that you're ingesting as well as the number of calories that you're burning. It's like you just kind of lose weight by proxy almost. You don't even have to try, but you're losing weight because it's 5 days a week that you're doing this. And so that absolutely is hard, not just from the time perspective, because you get to the end of your day and you're like, well, do I want to sleep 8 hours a night tonight or not? But it's from an energy perspective too. Because if this was 12 hours a day of working at a software company and we were sat at our desk or we were just in meetings for a bunch of hours per day, I might get to the end of that and like, I haven't really moved today. I want to kind of like stretch my joints. I want to like move my body. And so like, yeah, I'm going to go for a run after work today. I'm going to go ride my bike in the morning, or I'm going to go swim or do a yoga class or something like that. But you are so dog tired kind of at the end of one of these shifts that it's a hard ask to get somebody to like go work out at the end or even before your work shift. It was like only when I became a sous chef and we started this policy where the PM dinner team didn't have to come in until 2 p.m. And so my work shift was 2 p.m. to midnight every day. I really start to like say, okay, I can reasonably have a gym habit now. And so it's both of those things combined. Um, and then from there, I think it was like once I left restaurants, I finally had the ability to say, okay, I want to have this other thing that I want to start to see marginal improvement on, progressive overload, start to genuinely have results that I can see on this.
Yeah.
And I've always been kind of like a skinny guy. Like I've never really like had any sort of, like muscle development or, and part of that also motivated it, where I was like, and also speaking with teaching students, like I would tell these students that I wanted them to like stick with this habit that I'm trying to do with them. And I wanted to be able to kind of embody that. I wanted to be able to say, like, I have a reasonable level of fitness
I'm able to
where
stick
I'm
to
trying to
it.
give you advice on something. And it's not, like, well, who is this guy? Like if
Yeah.
he can't, and so it took a lot of time, but like all three of my big compound lifts, like I'm in the 1,000-pound club. For those that don't know, that's like your bench press, your squat, and your deadlift all combined together is over 1,000 pounds. And so it's like that took like 3 years of like really focused effort
What's your
to eventually
deadlift
get there.
PR?
Like 415, I think.
Okay, yeah.
And then
Mine is only like
squat,
220, but I'm
yeah,
a 5 foot
yes,
tall lady, so
heck yeah. I mean, that's still awesome. Yeah, 315 deadlifts. I just hit a 225 bench this past year. So bench is like a big focus for me for 2024. But
that's
yeah,
awesome.
fitness is, and everybody's version is different, right? Like flexibility might be your goal, or endurance might be your goal, or focus on swimming or weightlifting. Like there's so many ways to move. But another big motivation was like I had too many chefs that I worked for who would complain about the quality of their knees. Like they couldn't bend down to pick up
Yeah,
plates from the shelf and they were in their 40s,
that's
right?
a
And it's
reason I
because,
started lifting too, because like the
yeah,
camera guys would always complain like, "Oh, my back is shot, my knees, blah blah," and I'm like, and then I did research, and it's like if you lift and you build those muscles, then like you're putting less pressure on your bones.
yes,
So then that's why I started working out.
couldn't be a bigger advocate for it. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, I'm trying to, again, talk about this in a very realistic sense because Justin, that was working 13 hours a day,
could not.
did not want to hear this advice because
Yeah,
it,
of
it
course.
wouldn't have practically mattered, quite just being honest. Like
You
I
just
didn't have the
didn't have the
time.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't time. And so I'm absolutely not preaching to anybody to say you need to work out more. Everybody should, spend time doing exercise sessions. What I am saying is that your life can move in seasons, and you can have this season of I actually don't have any sort of fitness habit at all, and I think that's okay. I think in the world where everybody has everything and everybody is telling you that everything is possible, I'm kind of pushing back on that a little bit, and it's like you have to choose what you're going to say no to. And when you can
Yeah.
do that, then you have the ability to say, nope, I will do the workout thing later. It's like with me right now saying like I will have restaurants in my 40s. There are for lease and for sale signs in commercial real estate projects all the way around Seattle. And there are job postings for executive chefs and hey, will you be my business partner on this restaurant project all over the internet.
So I'm going to be real. I think that Seattle could use some spicing up in the food scene.
1,000%. And
I
it's like that's
thought the
part
food
of
in
me
Seattle
wanting to do
was
that.
kind of
That
bad.
yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
like I would joke with my boyfriend. And I would be like, if I was to be a chef, I would go to Seattle because to me the food in Seattle is like pretty bad.
Yeah. And
Like,
like not trying to throw shade or talk shit, but it's like there
well,
is a lot of
I'm not in the industry, so I'm like, I'll throw
yeah,
shade.
you can
Like,
you can throw the shade. But genuinely like the reason I wanted to come here is because I do think there's a white space. And it's this idea of, well, what's the best thing that's going to happen if I execute one of the best tasting menus in the city of Seattle?
mm-hmm.
I'm going to probably get my James Beard Award, which happens once and then it's over. And then
Yep.
what? Like Seattle Times is going to write about me? That's it? There
Well,
needs
yeah,
to be a
I don't know. I mean, I guess you could get showcased in like a TV show or something.
but like again, that happens once. It's like
Yeah.
what is great about Michelin for all of the shade that gets thrown at Michelin is the fact that every single year you have to maintain that Michelin star. And in my opinion, until the Michelin guide comes to Seattle, we are going to still continue to be this like dormant fine dining food city. Like there are chefs here that are incredibly talented, but like they don't really want to go for it because like what's the payoff? You need a sweeter carrot on the end of that stick. And so
I
that's why
also
we
just feel
see
like business wise, it's such a tough city because it's so it's extremely expensive, and I feel like the salaries are not much different than like New York or something. But then
yeah,
it's
so why
also yeah.
yeah, so why would you work in Seattle when you can go to New York and to your point,
I
make
wouldn't. I mean, I
the
left.
same yeah, make the same money, maybe even more money. You can be in a city where like people are actually doing cool things
Yeah.
and then you can just, you know what I mean? And so that's why we see in Seattle the restaurateurs that have done something special or like grown a substantial restaurant group is all in the casual side. So you have Tom Douglas with like Dahlia Lounge and Lola and Serious Pie. And then you have Ethan Stoll with like Tavolata and you have Renee Erickson with like Walrus and Carpenter. Like none of these are fine dining restaurants, but they have multiple locations throughout the city. And you can talk about the Seattle casual, nobody's willing to dress up and go out to eat kind of meme all day long, but
Yeah.
I genuinely think when you see that Canlis is still firing on all cylinders, there's absolutely an audience for it. It's just Canlis makes its money off of like the legacy of being this like 40-year-old fine dining restaurant that's family owned, and it's difficult for other people to be an incumbent in that game and have the motivation to kind of like stick with it, because it is absolutely a long game. And so I'm trying to go all the way to the ground level, to the root of it all, and try to build the infrastructure to be able to make it possible to do something special in the city. So
I agree with you. I think there's a lot of opportunity because there's a lot of stuff that's missing. I mean,
yep. And here's the thing,
and
the
there's just not
product
a
is
lot of
so fucking
choice
good.
too.
The product here is so fucking good. Do you know what
Like
I mean?
what do you mean product? Like produce?
Like the seafood we can get, the
Oh yeah, well that's
produce that's
seafood. Yeah.
grown, the wine that is available in the Walla Walla Valley, like Washington wine,
Yeah.
wine
Yeah.
from Oregon, wine from BC. It's actually kind of wild that like nobody has just kind of like jumped on it and
I think
really done
it
something
like you
about it.
said, it just boils down to money, and there's not much of an incentive for people to do it,
Exactly.
and again, like they could go to like California or New
Yep.
York, and then
Yep. Yep.
but even aside from like that high level of cooking, like I just felt like in Seattle there wasn't a lot of diversity of food. Like
Yeah.
I'm Cuban, right? There are no Cuban restaurants. There's like
I can't.
two,
Yeah.
and they're really mid.
Right.
And maybe my bar is really high because I'm from
Sure.
Miami and I'm Cuban.
Mm,
But there are two restaurants in the entire like Seattle-ish area, and there's one place that's like kind of like almost got there. It's called the Bongos. I don't know if
yeah.
you've been there.
Bongos. I know bongos. Yeah.
Yeah, like it was pretty good, right? Like that, but that's the only place. So stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that where I'm like, okay, well, uh, there just doesn't even see like I don't know. Like I would when I was up there, I would think like, okay, if I was in food, like it might be a good opportunity to come up here, like do some barbecue or something, like something different.
I think there's a proximity bias there, right? Like we're literally as far away from a corner diagonal perspective as we could be from Miami. And so there's a little bit of like, we much more lean
Yeah, like
on,
who's gonna get
like,
up there? Yeah.
yeah, we like Filipino food in Seattle is like unlike anything in a lot
Yep.
of other cities that you can experience. Vietnamese food, Japanese food, Thai food, like a lot of those cuisines are like
Yeah, there was
Italian.
a lot of good Asian options for sure.
Totally, totally. And like Seattle loves Italian food. There's like like the coffee culture here. Like there's a lot of strings that we can play, but I think that there's absolutely a lot of, again, to your point, white spaces, and not, like taking a city like New York maybe out of the picture. I don't think any city, or maybe even LA, like there are people that also complain about lack of certain cuisines being represented in LA too.
Really?
And
Because
so
I felt like LA. Because I went to LA for the first time, and I was just like, oh my god, they have everything. I still don't want to live in LA. It's really expensive
mm,
and hectic, but like I could be really happy there because I just had there's everything. There's nothing I couldn't get. I mean, maybe it's not like the best version of it, but it's good enough where I'm like, okay, I'm like good. And it's kind of like that here in Austin too. Like there's not been one cuisine or something where I couldn't find a spot for it. So,
totally. And I think in a lot of respects, it is hyper condensed to, again, the New Yorks and the LAs of the country. And then everywhere else, like you can point to almost any city and be like, X city is missing Y cuisine, and
yeah.
at least represented in a way where someone who values that cuisine is proud of it and would like repeatedly frequent that place. And so, yeah, it's always going to be like, that's the thing about food, is that there is an in-person element to it where if you're not in that city or you're not within driving radius of that, it's like it might as well not exist.
Yeah.
And that's the benefit and the curse to it, is that, back to something you asked me all the way at the beginning of the conversation, it's like it brings people together. And I think that there's something to that where it does that because it needs to. Like you can't make a software dish and just distribute it globally, like you could write a recipe and send it around, but it's like that's not the same as I made this for you and you can just enjoy it straight away.